He brought home a stray cat, then realized it wasn't a stray at all. The October afternoon hung heavy with the promise of rain when Era Malloy first spotted the grey cat sitting near the dumpsters behind her apartment complex. Not waiting by them exactly, more like pausing as if considering directions on an invisible map. She'd been carrying groceries, the paper bags already softening in the dampness, when the cat turned its head and regarded her with amber eyes that seemed far too knowing for a stray. Most feral cats bolted at the first sign of humans. This one simply blinked, slow and deliberate. "Hey there," Era said softly, setting down her bags. She'd always had a way with animals, a patience her ex-husband had once called stubborn kindness. The cat remained still, watching her with an expression that struck her as less wary and more assessing. She couldn't leave him out here, not with winter creeping closer every day, with frost already edging the morning grass and the forecasters predicting an early cold snap. The New England weather showed no mercy to the unprepared. Era spent the next 20 minutes coaxing the cat closer with pieces of the rotisserie chicken she'd just bought. He approached methodically, stopping every few steps to sample the air, his whiskers twitching. When he finally came within reach, she noticed how clean his coat was, not the matted, grimy fur of a cat who'd been living rough. His paws showed no signs of the cuts and calluses that outdoor life typically left behind. Getting him into the carrier she'd fetched from her storage unit took another 15 minutes. He didn't fight exactly. He simply resisted with the immovable quality of water flowing around an obstacle, redirecting each of her attempts with fluid patience until, seemingly of his own accord, he stepped inside. The walk up 2 flights of stairs to her apartment gave Era time to second-guess her decision. The building had strict HOA rules about pets, and her lease allowed only 1 cat or dog with a substantial deposit. She'd been saving for months, dreaming of companionship to fill the silence of her empty nest. Her daughter was away at college, her son had moved cross-country for work, but this cat might already belong to someone. She was probably just fostering him for a few days until she could find his owner. Inside her modest 1-bedroom apartment, Era set the carrier down in the hallway and opened the door. The cat emerged with the same unhurried deliberation he'd shown outside. And then something extraordinary happened. Instead of darting under the couch or racing to explore, instead of heading toward the kitchen where she'd set out a bowl of food and fresh water, the grey cat pressed his nose against the hallway wall. His nostrils flared as he drew in a long, deep breath. He held himself perfectly still for several heartbeats, then moved 3 feet to the left and repeated the gesture. Then another 3 feet. Era watched, transfixed, as the cat worked his way along the wall like someone reading Braille, taking in information she couldn't perceive. When he reached the corner where the hallway met her small living room, he stopped. His whole body relaxed. He sat down in that exact spot and began to wash his face with 1 grey paw. "What are you doing?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. The cat paused mid-wash and looked at her. In that moment, Era felt the first flicker of understanding. This wasn't the behavior of an animal exploring a new territory. This was the behavior of someone confirming a memory. She knelt down slowly, extending her hand. The cat sniffed her fingers, then bumped his head against her palm. Not the desperate plea of a starving stray, but a greeting, a hello between acquaintances. "You've been here before, haven't you?" Era said. "Not in my apartment, but somewhere close." The cat resumed washing his face, unconcerned with her epiphany. Over the next hour, as the rain finally arrived and began pattering against the windows, Era set up a temporary living situation. She spread an old towel in the corner where he'd chosen to sit, filled bowls with food and water, and placed a cardboard box lined with one of her worn sweatshirts nearby as a makeshift bed. The cat ignored the food initially, choosing instead to continue his systematic investigation of her apartment. He moved from room to room with purpose, nose working constantly, pausing at seemingly random spots to inhale deeply. By evening, he'd eaten a modest amount and drunk some water. He used the litter box she'd improvised from a plastic storage container without hesitation, another sign he was used to indoor living. When Era settled on her couch with a cup of chamomile tea and the novel she'd been trying to finish for weeks, the cat jumped up beside her. Not on her lap, he maintained a careful distance, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I should give you a name," she said, scratching behind his ears. He leaned into the touch, but kept his eyes half open, watchful. "At least a temporary one. How about Bramble? You remind me of the bramble bushes behind my grandmother's house, grey-green and impossible to redirect." Bramble's ears twitched. Whether in approval or simple acknowledgement of sound, Era couldn't tell. As darkness settled over the neighborhood and the rain intensified, drumming harder against the glass, Era found herself studying her unexpected guest. His coat was a deep, even grey, without any white markings, sleek and well-maintained. His body was lean but not thin, muscular in the way of a cat who got regular exercise. His eyes, when they caught the lamplight, gleamed with an intelligence that made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite name. "Where did you come from?" she asked softly. "And more importantly, where do you think you're going?" Because that was the feeling she couldn't shake. Bramble hadn't come here to stay. He'd come here to... What? Remember something. Find something. The thought followed her to bed that night. She left her bedroom door open, half expecting Bramble to join her, but he remained in the living room. When she got up at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom, she found him sitting by the front door, staring at it with an intensity that sent a small shiver down her spine. "It's okay," she told him, though she wasn't sure what she was reassuring him about. "We'll figure this out." Bramble turned his head to look at her, and in the dim glow of the nightlight she kept plugged in by the kitchen, his expression seemed almost calculating, as if he were figuring out something about her too. The next morning brought a clear, crisp October day, the kind where the light slanted gold through the scarlet leaves still clinging to the oak trees. Era called in to work. She had plenty of vacation days accumulated from years of putting her job at the insurance company ahead of everything else, and started making calls. The local animal shelter, the veterinary clinics within a 5-mile radius, even the police non-emergency line to check if anyone had reported a missing grey cat. Nothing. No one was looking for him, but Bramble was looking for something. Before we continue with the story, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support truly helps keep this channel alive and growing. At precisely 9:30 that morning, he began pacing by the front door. Not frantically, like a cat who needed to use the litter box or was frightened. Methodically, back and forth, pausing every few passes to stand on his hind legs and sniff at the doorframe. Era watched from the kitchen, coffee mug warming her hands, and made a decision. She'd been intending to keep him safely inside until she could get him checked for a microchip, but his distress, quiet and controlled as it was, tugged at her conscience. "All right," she said, approaching slowly so as not to startle him. "Let me get you a collar with my phone number, and we'll see what you're so determined to do." 20 minutes later, she'd fashioned a collar from a soft belt she no longer wore. Writing her name and number on a rectangle of cardstock and laminating it with packing tape. It wasn't perfect, but it would do until the pet store opened. Bramble tolerated the collar with the same patient resignation he showed for most things, shaking his head once when she fastened it, then accepting it. When she opened the front door, he didn't bolt. He stepped out into the hallway, paused to orient himself, then moved toward the stairwell with the confident gait of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Ira followed him down the stairs and out the building's main entrance. The morning air smelled of wet leaves and wood smoke from someone's fireplace. Bramble paused on the sidewalk, lifted his nose to sample the breeze, then turned right with certainty. They walked, Bramble leading, Era following at a discreet distance for 3 blocks. He moved at a steady pace, never hurrying, never hesitating at intersections. He seemed to know this neighborhood better than she did, and she'd lived here for 6 months. Finally, Bramble stopped in front of a small, well-maintained building with a sign that read, "Maple Crest Senior Living Community." He sat down on the walkway leading to the entrance and looked back at her, amber eyes patient. "Here?" Era asked, though she felt foolish talking to a cat in public. "This is where you wanted to go?" Bramble stood, walked to the entrance, and pressed his nose against the glass door. From inside, Era could hear voices and the distant sound of what might be a television. The building had an automatic door, but it only opened from the inside or with a keycard. "We can't just walk in there," Era said. But even as she spoke, she noticed something. Bramble's entire posture had changed. The watchful wariness he'd carried since yesterday had eased. He sat by the door, patient as stone, waiting. A few minutes later, a young woman in scrubs emerged, chatting on her phone. She held the door for Era without really looking at her, distracted by her conversation. Era slipped inside and Bramble followed. The lobby was small but cheerful. with potted plants on the windowsills and watercolor paintings of the local landscape hanging on cream-colored walls. It smelled like coffee and something else, something clean and warm, like laundry fresh from the dryer. Bramble's nose twitched. He moved forward, not exploring now, but homing in on something specific. He walked past the reception desk, currently unmanned, and down a short hallway. Era hurried after him, her heart beating faster. They shouldn't be here. Someone would stop them any moment, demand to know what they were doing. Halfway down the corridor, Bramble stopped. To their right, a door stood open, revealing a small laundry room. Industrial washers and dryers hummed and rumbled. A rolling cart held neatly folded towels and linens, still warm. The air here was thick with the scent of fabric softener and the mineral warmth of heated cotton. Bramble walked directly to the cart and, with a graceful leap, jumped onto the pile of warm towels. He circled once, twice, then settled down with a deep, rumbling purr that Era felt more than heard. "Hey!" A voice made Ira jump. She turned to find a plump woman in her 60s with reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain and an expression of surprise. "You can't be in here. This is a private—" She stopped, staring at Bramble. "Wait, is that—" "I'm so sorry," Era started, but the woman had already moved closer, her eyes fixed on the grey cat. "It can't be," she whispered. "We thought— Where did you find him?" And that was when Era realized that bringing home a stray cat might have been the simplest part of this entire situation. The woman introduced herself as Linda Chen, the activities coordinator at Maple Crest. She'd worked there for 8 years, she explained, leading Era to a small office off the main lobby, while Bramble remained curled on the warm laundry, eyes half closed in contentment. "We had a cat," Linda said, settling behind a desk cluttered with folders and framed photos of grandchildren. "Well, not officially, not on the books, but for about 3 years, a grey cat would show up in our laundry room almost every evening. He was so gentle, so calm. Some of our residents started calling him the therapy cat, though he wasn't certified or anything like that. He just appeared. We left food and water, and he'd stay for a few hours, then leave before the night staff came on duty." Era felt something tighten in her chest. "When did you last see him?" "Back in early spring. March, maybe April?" Linda's expression grew sad. "We had a major renovation, updating the HVAC system, replacing windows. There was construction noise for weeks. One day, he just didn't come back. We figured the chaos scared him off." She looked up, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Where did you find him?" "Behind my apartment building yesterday afternoon." Era twisted her hands together. "I live a few blocks from here. He seemed— I thought he was a stray, but now I don't think he was ever really lost." Linda smiled. "May I?" She gestured toward the laundry room. They returned to find Bramble exactly where they'd left him, though he'd rearranged himself into an even tighter curl. At Linda's approach, he opened one eye, then both, and sat up. "Hello, old friend," Linda said softly, extending her hand. Bramble bumped his head against her fingers, purring louder. "I missed you." "We all did. One of the residents mentioned him, didn't they?" Era asked, remembering Linda's reaction. "When you saw him?" "Mr. Grieve," Linda confirmed. "Alton Grieve in room 118. He's 84, has moderate dementia. Sometimes he knows where he is. Sometimes he thinks he's still living in his old house on Briarwood Street. But even on his confused days, he'd talk about the companion who comes back by smell." She paused. "I always thought it was a memory from his past. Now I wonder if he was talking about this cat." The implications settled over Era like a heavy blanket. "You think Bramble, that's what I've been calling him. You think he was coming here specifically to see Mr. Grieve? Maybe not just him, but yes, I think he had his reasons for being here." Linda glanced at her watch. "Mr. Grave usually has his breakfast around this time. Would you like to meet him?" Alton Grave was a small man, neatly dressed in corduroy pants and a cardigan despite the heated building. His room was tidy, with family photos covering most of the dresser top and a wedding picture from what looked like the 1960s in a place of honor on the nightstand. He sat in an armchair by the window, a barely touched plate of scrambled eggs on the tray beside him. "Mr. Grieve," Linda said gently, "I brought someone to see you." He looked up, his watery blue eyes unfocused at first, then sharpening when they landed on Bramble in Era's arms. "There he is," Alton said, his voice trembling with emotion. I told you he'd come back." "May I?" Era asked, and at Alton's eager nod, She placed Bramble on the old man's lap. The cat settled immediately, pressing his head under Alton's hand with a familiarity that brought tears to Era's eyes. The old man stroked Bramble's fur with shaking fingers, murmuring words too soft for Era to hear. "He used to come every evening," Alton said after a moment, looking up at them with sudden clarity. "Right around when they brought dinner. He'd sit with me while I ate, keep me company. I've been so lonely without him." Linda caught Era's eye, a question in her expression. Era understood what she was asking. What happens now? Does Bramble stay with you or does he stay here? But watching the cat and the old man together, Era realized the question itself might be wrong. Bramble hadn't been lost. He'd been displaced. And now he was trying to reconstruct something that had been disrupted. "Mr. Grieve," Era said carefully, "I've been caring for him, for the cat, since yesterday. I live nearby. Would it be all right if I brought him to visit you regularly?" Alton's face lit up. "You'd do that?" "I think he'd want me to." Over the next hour, Era learned more about the informal arrangement that had existed before the renovation. Bramble, though Alton had called him Grey, had apparently been a fixture at Maple Crest for years. No one knew where he lived or who fed him, but he appeared with such regularity that the staff had begun to rely on his presence. Some residents looked forward to seeing him. The night nurse had once joked that he was better at keeping schedules than the staff. "He always smelled like laundry," Alton said, still petting Bramble. "Clean, warm. My late wife, Helen, she loved doing laundry, said it was meditative. The house always smelled like fabric softener on Saturdays." His voice grew distant. "I miss that smell." Era felt the pieces clicking together. Bramble came here for the warmth, yes, but also for the scent. For the sensory comfort of laundry and routine and familiarity. And he came for Alton, and perhaps others, who needed the uncomplicated companionship only an animal could provide. When they finally left, after exchanging phone numbers with Linda and promising to return the next day, Bramble seemed reluctant to go. He kept looking back at the building, and twice he tried to turn around on the sidewalk. "I know," Era told him as they walked home, "but we'll come back. I promise." The afternoon was warm for October, one of those gift days where summer remembers itself briefly before winter takes hold. Era stopped at the pet store on the way home, Bramble waiting patiently outside where she could see him through the window. She bought a proper collar with a tag she had engraved with her name and number, a harness for walks, a leash, and a small GPS tracker that the clerk assured her could be recharged weekly. "Lots of people use these for cats who go outside," the clerk, a young man with kind eyes, explained. "Though honestly, cats have a way of coming back on their own. They're smarter than we give them credit for." "I'm beginning to understand that," Era murmured. That evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, Era made a decision. She installed the doorbell camera she'd been meaning to set up for months, one of those smart devices her son kept insisting would make her feel safer living alone. She positioned it to capture the hallway outside her apartment door, with a clear view of anyone or anything coming or going. Then she opened her front door and let Bramble out. He looked up at her, surprised. "Go on," she said softly. "I trust you. Just come back when you're ready." Bramble hesitated, as if testing whether she meant it, then walked out into the hallway with the same purposeful stride he'd shown that morning. Era closed the door and immediately pulled out her phone to watch the camera feed. She watched him descend the stairs, exit the building and turn right on the sidewalk. The camera's range ended there, but she'd done what she could. Now it was up to him. The apartment felt emptier than it had in months. Era tried to read, tried to watch television, tried to organize the closet she'd been meaning to tackle. Nothing held her attention. She kept checking her phone, looking at the doorbell camera feed, seeing nothing but the empty hallway. At 9:15, Bramble returned. Era watched through the camera as he climbed the stairs with slow, measured steps. When he reached her door, he sat down and waited. She opened it immediately. "Welcome back," she said. Bramble walked inside, moved directly to his water bowl, drank deeply, then went to the corner where she'd set up his bed. He circled 3 times and settled down with a sigh that sounded almost human in its contentment. But the most remarkable thing, the detail Era would note in the small journal she'd started keeping about him, was the scent. When Bramble came close enough for her to stroke his head, he smelled distinctly of warm cotton and a hint of something else. Something mechanical and clean like the inside of a dryer. He'd gone back to Maple Crest, Over the next week, the pattern repeated itself every single evening. At precisely 9 o'clock, Bramble would position himself by the door. Era would let him out. He'd return between 2 and 3 hours later, always carrying that same warm, clean scent. Era began making notes about everything. The exact times of his departures and arrivals, the weather conditions, how he behaved before and after his outings. She felt like a scientist, documenting a previously unknown species, except this species had chosen to share its secrets with her. On the 8th day, she decided to follow him again. She felt slightly guilty about it, as if she were betraying the trust they'd built, but her curiosity outweighed her conscience. She waited 5 minutes after he left, then grabbed her coat and hurried down the stairs. The October evening had turned chilly, the streetlights creating pools of yellow in the gathering darkness. Era spotted Bramble half a block ahead, moving at his steady, unhurried pace. She followed, keeping to the opposite side of the street, feeling ridiculous and exhilarated in equal measure. Bramble took the same route to Maple Crest, but this time he didn't stop at the main entrance. He continued around the building to a side door, a staff entrance, Era realized. As she watched from across the street, the door opened from inside and a young woman in scrubs stepped out to take a phone call. She propped the door open with her hip while she talked. Bramble slipped inside as easily as water flowing downhill. Era stood in the shadows, uncertain what to do next. She couldn't follow him inside through a staff entrance, but 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed with a text from Linda Chen. "Your friend is here. Thought you'd want to know. Mr. Greve is delighted." So Linda knew. Probably the whole staff knew by now, and they were allowing it, this quiet arrangement between a cat, an old man, and an informal community that found comfort in small, predictable joys. Era texted back, "Thank you for letting him in. I'll pick him up later if that's all right." The reply came quickly. "No need. He knows his way home. But come visit Mr. Grieve sometime during the day. He talks about you. Says you're the cat's person now." The cat's person. The phrase stayed with Era as she walked home alone, her breath misting in the cold air. She'd thought she was rescuing Bramble, but maybe he'd been rescuing her too, giving her a purpose, a connection to her community, a reason to step outside the comfortable routine she'd built around her quiet loneliness. That night, when Bramble returned at his usual time, Era was waiting with a new understanding. She wasn't his owner. She was his partner in something larger than either of them. "Tell me about your walk," she said, settling on the couch with him beside her. "Tell me what you see that I can't." Bramble, of course, said nothing, but he pressed his head against her hand, purring in that deep, rumbling way that spoke of contentment and acceptance. And for Era, that was answer enough. The veterinary clinic smelled like antiseptic and dog treats, a combination that made Era's nose wrinkle. She sat in the waiting room with Bramble in a carrier on her lap, filling out forms on a clipboard, while a Labrador in the corner panted enthusiastically at everyone who entered. "First visit?" the receptionist asked, a cheerful woman with purple-streaked hair and multiple ear piercings. "Yes, I found him about 2 weeks ago. I want to check for a microchip, make sure he's healthy, get his shots updated." "Smart. We see a lot of strays this time of year. People think they're doing cats a favor by letting them outside. Then winter comes and suddenly they're someone else's problem." She looked at Bramble through the carrier's mesh door. "He's a handsome boy. How's he been behaving?" "Like he's lived inside his whole life," Era admitted. "Uses the litter box, doesn't claw the furniture, doesn't try to eat my houseplants. Honestly, he's the easiest cat I've ever cared for. Sounds like someone trained him well." The receptionist handed back the clipboard. "Dr. Morrison will see you in about 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes stretched into 20, then 30. Era watched other pet owners come and go, their animals ranging from a yowling Siamese to a tiny, trembling Chihuahua wearing a sweater. Bramble remained calm in his carrier, occasionally pressing his nose to the mesh to sample the air, but showing none of the anxiety most cats displayed at the vet. Finally, a veterinary technician called them back. The exam room was small and efficient, with anatomical posters of cats and dogs on the walls and a metal examination table in the center. The tech, a young man named Josh, weighed Bramble and took his temperature with quick, practiced movements. 13 pounds. Good weight for his frame. Temperature normal. "Let me get the chip scanner." Era's heart began to beat faster. This was the moment she'd been both anticipating and dreading. If Bramble had a chip, it might lead them to his original owner. And while she'd grown attached to him over the past 2 weeks, she knew the right thing would be to reunite him with his family, if they'd been looking for him. Josh ran the scanner over Bramble's shoulders and neck. It beeped. Got one. Let me write down the number. He jotted something on the paperwork, then logged into a computer. His expression shifted from professional efficiency to puzzled concentration. Okay, that's interesting. What is it? The chip is registered, but hold on. He clicked through several screens. The registration is old, really old. It lists an address on Briarwood Street. That's only about 2 blocks from here. But the phone number attached to it has been disconnected. No email on file. Last updated. He squinted at the screen. 7 years ago. Era felt something sink in her chest. What does that mean? Usually it means the owner moved and forgot to update their information, or, he hesitated, or the owner passed away and no one thought to update the registry. Briarwood Street, where Alton Grieve had lived before moving to Maple Crest. The pieces clicked together with an almost audible snap. Can you give me that address? Josh looked uncertain. Technically, I'm not supposed to. I know the street. I know someone who lived there. I just need to confirm the house number. He glanced at the door, then back at the screen, then seemed to make a decision. 174 Briarwood Street. If you happen to find out who owned the chip, let us know. We like to keep the database updated. Dr. Morrison, when she arrived, was a slim woman in her 40s with efficient hands and a no-nonsense manner. She examined Bramble thoroughly, checking his teeth, ears, eyes, listening to his heart, palpating his abdomen. He's in excellent health, she concluded. Well socialized, clearly used to handling. No signs of malnutrition or parasites. His teeth show he's probably around 5 or 6 years old. Whatever his history, someone took good care of him. She made notes on the chart. You said you found him? Yes. Or rather, he found me. Era explained the situation. The systematic way Bramble had explored her apartment. His nightly visits to Maple Crest. The connection to Alton Grieve. Doctor. Morrison listened with growing interest. I've heard of therapy cats who get attached to specific places and routines. They're rare, but it happens. It sounds like he imprinted on that senior living facility. Probably the smells, the warmth, the predictable schedule. She scratched behind Bramble's ears. You're a special boy, aren't you? Can I keep him? I mean, legally, if no one comes forward. With an outdated chip and no active owner, yes. I'd recommend you contact the municipal animal shelter and file a found report, just to cover your bases. If no one claims him within 30 days, he's legally yours. But honestly, Dr. Morrison smiled. It sounds like he claimed you. Era left the clinic with updated shot records, a prescription for preventive flea medication, and a business card for the animal shelter. She also left with the weight of the Briarwood Street address pressing on her mind. That afternoon, instead of heading straight home, she drove the few blocks to Briarwood Street. It was an older neighborhood, the kind where mature oak trees created a canopy over the road and the houses sat back from the street on generous lots. Number 174 was a small Cape Cod-style home, well-maintained with fresh paint and a tidy yard. A young couple was outside, the woman planting mums in the flower beds while a man raked leaves. Era parked across the street and sat in her car, trying to work up the courage to approach them. What would she even say? Hello, I'm looking for information about a cat that may have lived here 7 years ago. But before she could decide, Bramble, secured in his carrier in the passenger seat, began to meow. Not his usual quiet, conversational sounds, but insistent, urgent yowls that she'd never heard from him before. Okay, she said, unlatching the carrier. Bramble exploded out of the carrier the moment the door opened. He leapt into the back seat, then pressed his face against the window, his whole body tense. The couple had noticed the commotion. They'd stopped working and were watching her car with curious expressions. There was nothing to do but get out. Era grabbed the carrier, scooped Bramble up. He allowed it, though every muscle in his body remained rigid, and crossed the street. I'm sorry to bother you, she began. This is going to sound strange, but I found this cat a few weeks ago and his microchip traces back to this address. I was wondering if you knew anything about him. The woman's face brightened. Oh my God, is that the cat? Honey, look! The man came closer, squinting. I'll be damned. Gray cat, amber eyes. That's him. You know him? Not personally, the woman said. But when we bought the house last summer, the previous owner's daughter mentioned him. She said her father had loved that cat, fed it every day, but it was never officially his. Just a neighborhood cat who adopted him, I guess. The father, Mr. Grieve, I think, had to move to assisted living because of health issues, and the daughter said the cat disappeared right around the same time. Ira felt tears prick her eyes. Mr. Grieve is at Maple Crest, about half a mile from here, and the cat found him, the man said wonderingly. After all this time, not just found him. He's been visiting him every night. Ira shifted Bramble in her arms. He'd relaxed slightly but kept his gaze fixed on the house. I think he's been trying to reconstruct his old routine. This house was part of it. The woman wiped her hands on her jeans. Would he like to see inside? I mean, we've changed a lot of things, but maybe... Ira hesitated, then nodded. If you don't mind, I think it might help him. Inside, the house was bright and modern, with fresh white paint and minimalist furniture. Nothing like what it probably looked like when Alton Grieve lived there. But Bramble didn't seem interested in the decor. He went immediately to a corner of the living room near a window, where a shaft of afternoon sunlight fell across the hardwood floor. He sat in that exact spot, in the sun, and closed his eyes. That's where he always sat, the woman whispered. The daughter showed us photos when we were deciding whether to buy. She said her father called it the cat's place and wouldn't let anyone put furniture there. They stood in silence for a moment, watching Bramble bask in the sunlight. Then he stood, shook himself and walked to the door, ready to leave. Thank you, Ira said. I know this was odd, but I think he needed this. Take care of him, the woman said. And tell Mr. Grieve, if you see him, that his house is being loved. That might matter to him. Driving back to her apartment, Ira felt something shift inside her. She'd been thinking of Bramble's behavior as a mystery to solve, a puzzle with a clear answer. But it was more than that. He wasn't lost. He was mourning. And he was trying to stitch together the pieces of a life that had been fragmented by circumstances beyond his control. That evening, she went to the municipal animal shelter, as Dr. Morrison had advised. The building was institutional and slightly depressing, with fluorescent lights and the echoing sound of barking dogs from the kennels in back. The woman at the front desk was pleasant but weary, with the air of someone who'd seen too many animals come through and not enough leave with happy endings. Ira filled out the found report, providing all the details she knew. The woman typed everything into her computer, then printed out a form. So here's how this works, she explained. You file the report, which we publish on our website and share with local vet clinics. If someone comes forward claiming ownership within 30 days, we facilitate a reunion. If no one comes forward, you can file for custodial ownership. She paused. But given what you've told me, outdated chip, no active owner, the cat's age, I'd say you're fine to proceed as his caretaker. Just be aware that legally, for the next month, someone could still claim him. What if I want to share custody? The question came out before Ira had fully thought it through. The woman blinked. Share custody? With the senior living facility, where he visits. Could that be arranged? That's unusual, but not impossible. We've had working cats, barn cats, bodega cats, where multiple people contribute to their care. You'd need written agreements, proof of veterinary care, documentation of where the cat lives primarily. She pulled out another form. It's more paperwork, but if everyone's on board, we can make it official. Ira took the form, her mind already racing ahead. An official arrangement would protect Bramble and give structure to what was already happening informally. It would satisfy the HOA requirements. He wouldn't be a stray, he'd be a registered therapy animal with documented caregivers. It would give Alton Grieve a peace of mind and let the staff at Maple Crest stop worrying about liability. I'll talk to everyone involved, Ira said. Thank you for this. As she left the shelter, Bramble secure in his carrier beside her, Ira felt the first stirring of something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. She wasn't just living day to day anymore, going to work and coming home and filling the hours with television and books. She was part of something larger. She was helping reconstruct a community that had been temporarily displaced. That night, she drafted an email to Linda Chen at Maple Crest, explaining the situation and proposing a formal arrangement. She attached the shelter's custody form and waited, her finger hovering over the send button. Bramble jumped onto the desk and pressed his head against her hand. You're sure about this? She asked him. You want me to lock us both into a schedule, into responsibilities, into all the bureaucracy that comes with making things official. Bramble's purr rumbled through his whole body. Ira hit send. November arrived with a cold snap that made the weatherman on the local news use the phrase unseasonably frigid 3 times in one broadcast. frost etched intricate patterns on Era's windows each morning, and the trees finally surrendered their leaves in great rattling waves. The neighborhood transformed from autumn's fire to winter's skeleton in the space of a week. Inside her apartment, Era installed a cat door insert in one of her windows, a contraption her son had shipped overnight from California after she'd mentioned Bramble's nightly excursions. It was weatherproof and secure, with a magnetic lock that only opened for the special collar tag she'd attached to Bramble's harness. The HOA regulations required that any pet with outdoor access be microchipped, registered, and monitored. She'd satisfied all three requirements within days of receiving Linda Chen's enthusiastic reply to her email. The formal arrangement was taking shape, though the paperwork was daunting. Shared custody forms, liability waivers, veterinary health certificates, vaccination records, a behavioral assessment from a certified animal therapist. The HOA had initially pushed back. Animals weren't allowed to roam free through the community, until Era pointed out that Bramble wore a GPS tracker, followed a documented route, and was always under supervision either at her apartment or at Maple Crest. "Think of him as a therapy animal with a commute," she'd told the board president, a stern woman named Barbara, who softened only when discussing her own grandchildren. "He's providing a service." Barbara had grudgingly approved a 6-month trial period, with the stipulation that Era install the cat door, maintain active GPS tracking, and submit monthly reports documenting Bramble's whereabouts and behavior. It was exhausting and occasionally absurd, but Era found herself energized by the challenge. She'd spent too many years letting life happen to her. This felt like finally grabbing the wheel. On a particularly cold Wednesday in mid-November, Era was reviewing her monthly report when her phone rang. Linda Chen's name appeared on the screen. "Era, do you have a few minutes? Something's come up." 10 minutes later, Era was bundled in her warmest coat, walking briskly toward Maple Crest. The sidewalks crunched with salt crystals that the city had spread in anticipation of ice. Her breath came in white puffs. Bramble, she knew from the GPS tracker app on her phone, was already at Maple Crest. He'd left through his cat door at his usual time, 9 o'clock, right after eating his dinner. Linda met her in the lobby, her expression a mixture of concern and excitement. "I'm sorry to call you out in this weather, but I thought you should see this." She led Era down the familiar hallway to the laundry room. Inside, warm and humid despite the cold outside, Bramble sat on his favorite pile of towels. But tonight he wasn't alone. An elderly woman sat in a folding chair beside the laundry cart, watching him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Era, this is Marjan Pfeiffer. She lives in room 203. Linda's voice was gentle. "Marjan, this is Era Malloy. She's been caring for the cat, for Bramble." Marjan looked up. She was a small woman, probably in her late 70s, with white hair curled in a style that reminded Era of her own grandmother. Her hands, resting in her lap, were thin and marked with age spots, the fingers slightly gnarled with arthritis. "I've been trying to find him," Marjan said, her voice thick with emotion. "For months. I walk around the neighborhood every afternoon, looking. My daughter said I was being foolish, that he was just a stray cat, but I knew he was special." Era sat down slowly on another folding chair someone had brought in. "You knew Bramble before, not his name." "I called him Silver because of how his coat looked in the moonlight." Marjan reached out tentatively. Bramble stood, stretched, and walked across the towels to press his head against her fingers. Fresh tears spilled down the older woman's cheeks. "He used to come to my apartment. Well, not my apartment here, my old apartment 2 buildings down, before I moved here in August." "What happened?" Era asked softly. "I had a fall. Broke my hip. My daughter insisted I couldn't live alone anymore, that I needed to be somewhere with staff and medical care." Marjan stroked Bramble's head with shaking hands. "I cried the whole first week I was here, not because of the pain, though that was bad enough, but because I couldn't find him. I'd left a note with my old landlord asking him to watch for a gray cat, to call me if he saw one, but he never called." Linda handed Marjan a tissue. "Bramble showed up here about a week after the renovation ended. We had no idea he might have been connected to you, Marjan. You never mentioned a cat. I thought he was gone. I thought..." Marjan's voice broke. "I thought I'd never see him again." Era felt her own eyes sting. This was what Bramble had been doing all along. Not just visiting Alton Grieve, though that was part of it. He was reconstructing his entire network, finding everyone who'd been displaced by the inevitable changes that came with aging and illness and the slow march of time. "How did you find him tonight?" Era asked. Marjan laughed wetly. "I couldn't sleep. My insomnia's been terrible lately. I came down to ask if anyone could make me chamomile tea, and I heard, I don't know. I heard something, like a cat talking to itself, and I followed the sound, and there he was." She looked at Bramble, her expression full of wonder. "How did you find me? How did you know I was here?" "I think he's been looking for you too," Era said. "He visits every night. I thought it was just for Alton Grieve and the laundry, but maybe he's been checking all the rooms," Linda finished, "looking for familiar scents, familiar people." They sat in silence for a while, the three women and the grey cat, surrounded by the warm hum of industrial dryers and the clean smell of detergent. Finally, Marjan spoke again. "May I visit him? I know he's yours now, and I don't want to intrude, but—" "He's not mine," Ira interrupted gently. "He's his own. I'm just helping him do what he wants to do." She made a decision. "Would you like to be part of the formal custody arrangement? Linda and I have been working with the animal shelter to create a shared care system. You could be included." Marjan's face lit up, then fell. "I don't have much money. The cost of this place, my medical bills." "Bramble doesn't care about money, he cares about connection." Era pulled out her phone and showed Marjan the GPS tracking app. "See? He makes rounds. He has a circuit. You're part of that circuit whether you knew it or not." Over the next week, they formalized Marjan's inclusion in what was becoming an increasingly complex arrangement. The animal shelter, bemused but supportive, added her name to the custody agreement. The Maple Crest administration, seeing the positive impact on two of their residents, agreed to adjust their pet policy to accommodate regular visits from a certified therapy animal, a designation Bramble had earned through a surprisingly easy evaluation by a local animal therapist who'd pronounced him exceptionally calm and well socialized. But accommodations came with complications. Marjan, it turned out, had moderate allergies to cats. Not severe enough to prevent all contact, but enough that extended visits left her congested and wheezing. Her doctor prescribed antihistamines and suggested limiting direct contact to 20 minutes at a time, with hand-washing immediately afterward. The HOA sent Era a warning letter about excessive animal traffic through the community, citing complaints from neighbors who'd noticed Bramble's nightly walks. Era responded with copies of the GPS logs, showing that Bramble stayed on sidewalks, avoided private property, and never strayed from his established route. The HOA countered by requiring that he wear a reflective collar at night for safety reasons. The veterinary bills were adding up. Monthly checkups to maintain his therapy animal certification, preventive medications, the costs of the GPS tracker's cellular plan. Era had budgeted for a pet, but not for a pet with this level of documentation requirements. And then there was the catio. The HOA's final concession, the price of their approval, was that Era had to install an enclosed outdoor space attached to her apartment. A catio, they called it, a screened structure where Bramble could experience the outdoors without technically being loose in the community. The quotes she received ranged from $800 to $1,500. Era sat at her kitchen table one evening in late November, surrounded by paperwork and bills, and felt the weight of it all pressing down. She'd wanted to help. She'd wanted to make things right for Bramble, for Alton, for Marjan, but she hadn't anticipated how much it would cost, not just in money but in time, in energy, in dealing with bureaucracy and regulations and people who saw a cat as a liability rather than a lifeline. Bramble jumped onto the table, something she usually discouraged, and sat directly on top of the catio quote. He looked at her with those amber eyes that saw far more than any cat should. "I don't know if I can do this," she told him. "I want to. But the money, the rules, all these people wanting documentation and proof, and—" He pressed his forehead against hers. His purr vibrated through her skull. "You're worth it," she whispered. "You know that, right? You're worth all of this." Bramble's purr intensified. The next day, Era contacted a local handyman service. A man named Joe, semi-retired and looking for small projects, agreed to build a basic catio for $600 if she bought the materials. She dipped into her modest savings, the funds she'd been building for a vacation she never quite took, and gave him the go-ahead. The shelter sent the finalized custody agreement, 4 pages of legal language establishing that Bramble was jointly cared for by Era Malloy, primary, Maple Crest Senior Living, secondary, with Marjan Pfeiffer as a designated visitor. Linda Chen was listed as the facility contact, responsible for documenting Bramble's visits and ensuring the staff understood his role and needs. "It's official," Linda said when they met to sign the papers in her office. "Bramble is now a registered therapy animal with certified shared custody across multiple caregivers. I've never seen anything quite like this." "Is that good or bad?" Era asked. "It's extraordinary, and it's teaching us something about what community can look like when we're willing to be flexible." That evening, as the November wind rattled the windows and made the bare tree branches scratch against the siding, Era received a text from an unknown number. "Is this Era? This is Sable Hale. I live in 4B. Can we talk?" Era stared at the message, trying to place the name. Then she remembered. 4B was the young couple on the 4th floor, the ones she'd seen in the lobby a few times with a baby in a carrier. She'd never spoken to them beyond polite hellos. She typed back, "Of course, is everything okay?" The response came quickly. "Yes, but I have a question about your cat. Can I come down?" 5 minutes later, Sable Hale stood in Era's apartment, a sleeping baby strapped to her chest in a wrap, her expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been seeing your cat, Bramble, right, in the hallway, and I wanted to ask you something." "Okay," Era said cautiously. "When we moved in last summer, before we even unpacked, there was a gray cat who came to our door. Just sat there, very polite, like he was waiting for someone. My husband Denton gave him some water and he drank it and left. We thought he was a stray, but he was so clean and calm that we figured he must belong to someone." Sable adjusted the sleeping baby. "He came back a few times over the next month, always in the evening. He never tried to come inside, just sat by the door for a few minutes, then left." Era felt the familiar puzzle pieces starting to align. "When did he stop coming?" "Around the same time you moved in, I think. September." Sable looked embarrassed. "I asked the previous tenant about it when she came back to get some mail she'd forgotten. She said a grey cat used to sleep on their couch sometimes. They'd left the building door propped open a lot. She was a smoker, went outside constantly, and the cat would slip in and curl up on this lavender blanket they had. She said it never stayed long, just 20 minutes or so, then left on its own." Lavender. Again. "Did she say anything else?" Era asked. "Just that the cat disappeared when they started packing to move. She thought maybe the chaos scared him off." Sable paused. "Is he yours now?" It's complicated, but yes, he lives with me, though he also lives at Maple Crest in a way." Sable smiled. "He's community property." "Exactly. Would it be okay if he visited us again? I mean, officially?" "Denton's been working from home since the baby was born, and he mentioned yesterday that he missed seeing the cat. Said it used to relax him during stressful work calls." And just like that, Bramble's network expanded again. Over the next week, Era added Sable and Denton Hale to what she'd started calling, only half-jokingly, the Bramble Network. They were younger than the other people in his circuit, probably in their early 30s, but they had the same need for connection, the same appreciation for small, reliable joys. "He visits them on Tuesdays and Thursdays," Era reported to Linda during one of their increasingly frequent check-ins. 20 minutes, give or take. He sits on their couch. They bought a lavender blanket, matching what the previous tenants had, and just exists. Denton says it's like meditation, and they're okay with the shared custody arrangement. They don't want formal custody. They're happy being part of his rounds." Era laughed. "Bramble has created a social network that spans 4 households and 1 senior living facility. He's more connected than I am." But connection, as Era was learning, came with cost. On Thanksgiving Eve, as she prepared a modest meal for one, her children were with their father's family this year, Era's phone buzzed with a notification from the GPS tracker. Bramble's battery was at 5%. She'd been meaning to charge the tracker for 2 days, but work had been chaotic and she'd forgotten. Now Bramble was somewhere between her apartment and Maple Crest, and the GPS was about to die. Era grabbed her coat and hurried outside. The evening was bitter cold, with wind that cut through her layers like a knife. She followed Bramble's last known route, walking quickly, checking her phone every few seconds. The tracker died when she was still 3 blocks from Maple Crest. For 5 long, anxious minutes, Era walked the route, calling Bramble's name, feeling foolish and frightened in equal measure. What if he'd been hit by a car? What if someone had taken him? What if... Then she saw him. He was sitting under a streetlight, calmly washing his face as if waiting for her. "Don't ever do that to me again," she said, scooping him up. He was cold to the touch, his fur damp with mist. "From now on, I charge your tracker every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. No exceptions." Bramble tolerated her scolding with feline patience, then licked her chin once, briefly, as if to say he understood. That night, sitting in her apartment with Bramble curled beside her, and a simple dinner of turkey sandwich and sweet potato, Ira realized something. She'd been so focused on the logistics, the paperwork, the money, the schedules, that she'd almost forgotten the reason behind it all. Love wasn't about possession. It was about facilitating freedom. And sometimes freedom required a GPS tracker with a fully charged battery. The week before Thanksgiving brought a peculiar warmth to New England, one of those false springs that made people doubt climate change until winter reasserted itself with a vengeance days later. Ira took advantage of the mild weather to visit Maple Crest during daylight hours, something she'd been meaning to do since formalizing the custody arrangement, but kept postponing due to work and her general reluctance to intrude on Bramble's independent schedule. Linda met her in the lobby with a smile that looked slightly strained. "Perfect timing. Mr. Grieve has been asking for you." "Well, not you specifically. He asks for the cat's person, which I've decided is actually a lovely title." They found Alton in the common room, sitting by a window with a half-completed jigsaw puzzle spread on a card table before him. The puzzle depicted a lighthouse on a rocky coast. Maine, maybe, or Massachusetts. The sky pieces remained unsorted in their box. "Mr. Grieve," Linda said gently, "this is Ira. She takes care of—" "The grey one," Alton interrupted, looking up with sudden clarity. "The one who remembers." Ira sat down across from him. "That's right, Bramble. Though you called him Grey. Names don't matter to cats, only smells do and routines." Alton picked up a puzzle piece, studied it, set it down in the wrong place. "My late wife Helen used to say I had the memory of a cat, meant it as a compliment, though it didn't sound like one." He smiled, distant. "I remember what matters. The rest is just noise." They worked on the puzzle together for a while, not talking much. Ira found the rhythm soothing, the quiet search for matching pieces, the small satisfaction when two sections connected. Alton's hands shook when he tried to place pieces, so she did most of the actual assembly while he identified which pieces went where. "You're good to him," Alton said finally. "The cat, I can tell. He's good to me too. He was there when my Helen died, right at the end." Alton's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I was holding her hand and she'd stopped talking, stopped opening her eyes. The hospice nurse said it could be hours or days. And then I felt this weight on my lap, and there he was, Grey, just sitting there, warm and real, and Helen's breathing changed, got easier, and he stopped, swallowing hard. She went peaceful, with both of us there." Ira felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't know. He understands endings. He understands vigils." Alton looked at her directly, and for a moment the confusion lifted entirely from his gaze. "He's doing it again now, for me. He comes because he knows I'm near the end, and he doesn't want me to be afraid." "You're not dying," Ira said automatically, though she had no way to know if that was true. "Everyone is dying, it's just a question of proximity." Alton turned back to the puzzle. "That's why the visits matter, why the routine matters. Not because I need entertainment or distraction, because I need to know that some things continue, that there's a thread running through from Helen to now to whatever comes next." Linda, who'd been listening quietly from near the door, wiped her eyes. "Mr. Grieve has good days and hard days. This is a good day." They finished the lighthouse or came close enough that Alton declared it done. As Ira prepared to leave, Alton caught her hand. "On Thanksgiving, he'll come early, around 4 o'clock instead of 9. Because that was Helen's dinner time and he'll remember." He squeezed her fingers with surprising strength. "Don't try to stop him. Don't worry if the schedule changes. He knows what he's doing." Ira promised she wouldn't interfere. On Thanksgiving afternoon, after a pleasant but slightly lonely phone call with her daughter in Boston and her son in San Diego, Ira set out a modest meal for herself. She'd never been an elaborate cook, and with just one person to feed, there seemed little point in the full turkey and fixings production. Instead, a turkey breast, some roasted vegetables, a store-bought cranberry sauce, and a pumpkin pie from the grocery bakery. At 3:30, Bramble appeared by the door. Era checked the time, double-checked it. His usual departure was still 5.5 hours away, but Alton had predicted this, down to the approximate time. "All right," she said, opening the door. "Go do what you need to do." Bramble hesitated, which was unusual. He looked back at her, then at the door, then at her again. It took Era a moment to understand. "You want me to come with you?" His tail swished once. "Yes." She grabbed her coat and her keys. They walked together through the unseasonably warm evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Most houses had cars in the driveways, golden light spilling from windows where families gathered. The streets were quiet otherwise, everyone inside and together. At Maple Crest, Linda was just leaving for the day, heading to her own family gathering. "Oh, I didn't expect to see you both. Is everything okay?" Bramble wanted an early visit. Alton predicted it. Linda's expression softened. "Of course he did. The staff knows to expect him, Mr. Grev told everyone who'd listen that his companion would arrive for Thanksgiving dinner. I think they half believed he was talking about a deceased relative until I explained." She paused. "Stay as long as you'd like. The evening staff knows you. And happy Thanksgiving." Inside, the building smelled like institutional turkey and canned gravy. Not unpleasant, but not quite like home either. They found Alton in the dining room, seated at a table with 3 other residents. His dinner sat mostly uneaten in front of him, the food arranged but not touched. When he saw Bramble, his face transformed. "There he is, right on time." Bramble walked directly to Alton's chair and sat beside it, close enough to touch but not demanding attention, just present, just there. "Would you like to join us?" one of the other residents asked Ira. She was a heavy-set woman with kind eyes and the remnants of what must have been a very elaborate hairstyle. "I'm Patricia. That's Maurice and that's Dorothy. We're the island of misfit toys, everyone whose families couldn't make it today. My son has the flu," Dorothy explained. She was tiny, bird-like, with hands so thin Era could see every vein. "Better I'm here than getting sick," he said. "He's probably right, but it's still lonely," Maurice finished. He was a large man with a veteran's cap perched on his head and a voice gravelled by decades of what Era guessed was smoking. "Holidays are the worst when you're old. Everyone's too busy or too far away or too sick themselves." Era pulled up a chair from a neighboring table. "Then I'm glad to join you." They ate together, sharing stories. Patricia had been a music teacher for 40 years. Maurice had served in Vietnam and still walked with a limp from shrapnel. He said he could feel coming when it rained. Dorothy had raised 7 children and had 19 grandchildren she could name in order of birth without hesitation. And Alton, on his clear-minded day, told them about Helen, about their courtship in the 1960s, about their small wedding during a snowstorm, about the years they'd built together like assembling a puzzle one piece at a time. "She'd have loved this," he said, gesturing to include Bramble, the table, the assembled company. "Helen believed community was something you created, not something you waited to find." Bramble, throughout the meal, remained motionless beside Alton's chair. He didn't beg for food. He didn't wonder or get restless. He simply existed, a grey anchor, holding them all in place. After dinner, as the staff cleared plates and brought out slices of pie, Alton reached down and stroked Bramble's head. The cat pressed into his hand, purring. "Thank you," Alton said, and it took Era a moment to realize he was speaking to her. For understanding, for not trying to keep him contained or safe or whatever people think they need to do with animals, for letting him be what he is. "What is he?" Era asked. "A bridge," Alton said simply. "Between then and now. Between alone and together." Walking home in the dark, Bramble moving silently beside her on the empty sidewalks, Era thought about bridges, about how they connected things that would otherwise remain separate, about how they required support on both ends or they'd collapse. She'd been thinking of herself as Bramble's caretaker, his owner, his person, but maybe she was just one end of a bridge. And Alton, Marjan, the Hales, even the Maple Crest laundry room with its warm towels and clean scent, they were all part of the same structure, holding each other up. Back in her apartment, she found a text from her daughter. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. Sorry we couldn't be there. Love you." And one from her son. "Did you eat something good? Want to video chat later?" She replied to both, feeling less lonely than she had in months. Then she looked at Bramble, who'd settled in his favorite corner, exactly where he'd first stopped to smell the walls when she brought him home. "You've changed my life," she told him. "You know that?" Bramble's purr rumbled through the quiet apartment. Answer enough. That night, before bed, Era added a note to her Bramble journal, the small notebook where she tracked his routines and behaviors. Thanksgiving. Early visit to Maple Crest, 4 p.m. Remained with Alton Grieve through dinner. Exhibited unusual behavior. Requested my accompaniment. First time showing preference for shared experience over independent routine. Notable. Alton's prediction of timing was accurate. Suggests Bramble's schedule follows emotional calendar, not just clock time. What else does he remember that we've forgotten? The question followed her into sleep, where she dreamed of bridges and grey cats, and the invisible maps we all carry, showing us the way home. The first major snowstorm of the season arrived on the third Sunday of December, bringing with it the peculiar silence that comes when the world wraps itself in white. Era woke to find her windows frosted over, the view outside transformed into an impressionist painting of grey and white. The power had gone out sometime during the night. Her alarm clock was dark, her phone charger wasn't working, and when she tried the kitchen light, nothing happened. She checked her phone, 7% battery remaining, and saw an emergency alert. Major power outage affecting downtown and surrounding neighborhoods. Estimated restoration time, 24 hours. Her apartment was already growing cold. The heating system relied on electricity for its blower, and without it, the temperature would drop quickly. She wrapped herself in a thick robe and went to find Bramble. He wasn't in his corner, he wasn't on the couch, he wasn't anywhere in the apartment. With a jolt of panic, Era remembered the cat door. Bramble had gone out for his morning patrol, something he'd started doing recently, a quick circuit around the building before returning for breakfast. She'd approved it because it seemed to settle him for the day, giving him a sense of order before the evening's longer journey. But with the power out, the magnetic lock on the cat door wouldn't work. He'd be trapped outside. Era pulled on layers, thermal underwear, jeans, 2 sweaters, her heavy winter coat, and grabbed her gloves and hat. Her boots were by the door, still damp from yesterday's walk. She pulled them on and headed outside. The world had transformed overnight. 8 inches of snow covered everything, softening hard edges and muffling sound. The street had been plowed once, but was rapidly filling in again as snow continued to fall. No cars moved. No one was outside. The whole neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. She checked the GPS tracker on her phone, 3% battery now, and saw Bramble's last location was near Maple Crest. The timestamp showed 15 minutes ago. Era walked as quickly as the snow allowed, which wasn't very fast. Her breath came in white plumes. The cold bit at her exposed face despite the hat and scarf. She'd lived in New England her entire life, but this cold felt different, deeper, the kind that found its way through layers and settled in your bones. By the time she reached Maple Crest, her phone battery was down to 1%. The building was dark, like every other building on the block, but unlike her apartment complex, Maple Crest had an emergency generator. She could hear its rumble and see lights in what she now knew was the rear corridor where the offices and laundry room were located. The front door, an automatic sliding door, wouldn't open without power. Era pulled at it uselessly, then began walking around the building, her boots crunching through snow that reached mid-shin in the deeper drifts. She found Bramble at the emergency exit on the east side. He was sitting in the snow, not lying down, not sheltering, but sitting upright and alert, staring at the door. When he heard her approach, he turned his head, meowed once, then looked back at the door. "Come on," Era said, bending to pick him up. "Let's get you inside somewhere warm." Bramble resisted, not with claws or fighting, but with that fluid, immovable quality she'd come to recognize. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to go through this door. "It's locked," Era told him. "It only opens from inside, and even if it didn't, we can't." The door opened. A young man in scrubs poked his head out, letting a wave of warm air escape. "Era, what are you doing out here? And, oh, hey, Bramble." He held the door wider. Come in, come in. Jesus, you must be freezing." Inside, the corridor was warm and well lit, the generator humming steadily in a utility room nearby. The young man, his name tag read Marcus, helped Era brush snow off her coat. "The front door's not working without main power," he explained. "Just the emergency systems are on. Lights, heat, medical equipment, and the kitchen. Residents are fine, but we're keeping everyone in their rooms or the common areas near the generator until power comes back." "Is Mr. Grieve okay?" Era asked. Marcus's expression shifted slightly. He's confused today. The power outage has him disoriented. He keeps asking about Helen, saying she'll be worried if the roads aren't plowed. Linda's with him now. Bramble, free of Era's grip, had already started down the corridor. But instead of heading toward the laundry room, he turned toward the residential wing. "He knows where he's going," Marcus said. "I'll take you to Mr. Greaves' room." Alton Greaves' room was at the end of a short hallway, one of the larger single-occupancy units, with a window overlooking what was probably a nice view of the grounds in warmer weather. Now it showed only white. Inside, the room was lit by 2 battery-powered lanterns and the glow from the hallway. Alton sat on his bed, fully dressed, but looking lost, while Linda Chen sat beside him, speaking in low, soothing tones. Bramble entered without hesitation, jumped onto the bed and climbed directly into Alton's lap. The change in the old man was immediate. His hands, which had been plucking anxiously at his cardigan, stilled. His expression cleared slightly. He began stroking Bramble's fur with automatic, soothing motions. "There you are," Alton whispered. "I was worried. Helen said you'd come, but I thought maybe the snow—" "He's here," Linda said gently. "He found his way, even in the storm." Era stood in the doorway watching. She'd seen Bramble calm Alton before, but this was different. This wasn't just companionship. This was essential, medicinal. The cat was literally grounding the man, pulling him back from whatever confusion the power outage had created. "How did he know?" Era asked Linda quietly. "That Alton needed him today, specifically?" Linda shook her head. "I don't know. But he's been like this since the power went out. Agitated, anxious. Marcus and I have been taking turns sitting with him. Nothing was working until Bramble," Era finished. They stayed for 2 hours, the time stretching in the strange, suspended way that power outages create. Without clocks that worked, without the normal hum and rhythm of electricity, time became something you felt rather than measured. Alton drifted in and out of clarity, sometimes recognizing where he was, sometimes believing he was in his old house waiting for Helen to return from the grocery store. But through it all, Bramble remained constant in his lap, purring steadily. Around what Era guessed was noon, her phone had died completely by then, Marjan Pfeiffer appeared in the doorway. She was using a walker, moving slowly and carefully. "I heard there was a visitor," she said. "I thought I'd check." When she saw Bramble, her face brightened. "Oh good, I was hoping he'd make it through the storm. Would you like to sit with him too?" Linda offered her chair, but Marjan shook her head. No, he's needed here more. I just wanted to see him, to know he was safe." She looked at Era. "You must have been worried when you couldn't find him." "Terrified," Era admitted. "But you trusted him enough to go looking rather than assuming he'd come back on his own." Marjan's smile was knowing. "That's real love, you know. Trust that respects independence." After Marjan left, Linda pulled Era aside into the hallway. "I need to ask you something, and it's unusual. Okay? The generator is only rated for essential systems. If the power stays out overnight, we're fine. We have enough fuel for 3 days if needed. But the protocol is that only staff and residents can stay in the building during extended outages. For safety reasons, for liability." Linda looked uncomfortable. "But I'm wondering if we could make an exception. For Bramble. You want him to stay here?" "Not permanently, just until power comes back. He's clearly helping Mr. Grieve more than any medication we could give him. And to be honest, some of the other residents would benefit from seeing him too. The ones who are anxious about the storm." Linda paused. "I'd completely understand if you said no. He's your cat, your responsibility. But I thought I'd ask." Ira looked back toward Alton's room, where Bramble was still curled on the old man's lap, a small grey guardian against confusion and fear. "He's not my cat," she said slowly. "He's his own cat, and I think he'd want to stay. Thank you." They set up a temporary station for Bramble in the laundry room. His water and food bowls, a litter box borrowed from a storage closet, a pile of clean towels that were still warm from the dryer. But Bramble spent most of the day and evening making rounds. He visited Alton frequently, staying until the old man seemed calm. He sat with Marjan for a precious 15 minutes, pressing against her leg while she wheezed through her antihistamine-managed allergies. He even ventured into the common room, where several residents were gathered around a battery-powered radio, listening to storm updates, and let himself be petted by trembling, grateful hands. Era stayed too, even though Linda offered to drive her home in the facility's emergency vehicle. Something told her Bramble wouldn't settle until she did, that he needed to know she was safe as much as she needed to know he was safe. The power came back at 3 in the morning, the sudden blaze of overhead lights, and the click-whir of systems rebooting waking Era from an uncomfortable doze in a chair in the common room. Around her, residents who'd been sleeping in recliners stirred and blinked. "Thank God," someone muttered. "I need my CPAP machine." Staff began helping people back to their rooms. Linda found Era and Bramble in the laundry room, where they'd retreated when the lights came on. "The roads should be ploughed by morning," Linda said. "You're welcome to stay until then, but you're also welcome to head home if you'd prefer. I can call you a cab. I don't think you should walk in this cold." But Era looked at Bramble, who'd positioned himself at the door, ready to leave now that the crisis had passed. "We'll walk. It's not far. And I think we both need the air." Outside, the storm had stopped. The sky was clearing, revealing stars so bright and cold they seemed to crackle. The temperature had dropped further, well below 0, Era guessed. Her breath froze in the air before her face. But the street had been ploughed, and the sidewalks, while still snow-covered, were passable. They walked home in silence, Bramble's paws making small, crunching sounds in the snow. When they reached the apartment building, Era realized something. The GPS tracker hadn't mattered. The dead phone, the dying battery, none of it had mattered. She'd found him because she'd understood where he'd go, what he'd need to do. She'd learned to read his map. Inside her apartment, now blissfully warm again, Era plugged in her phone and waited for it to come back to life. When it did, she had 7 worried messages from her children, 3 missed calls from the HOA president asking if she'd seen any storm damage, and 1 text from Linda, sent just minutes ago. "Mr. Grieve is sleeping peacefully. Says to tell you and Bramble thank you for the vigil." The vigil. Yes, that's what it had been. Not a visit, not a coincidence. A vigil. Bramble had known somehow that Alton would need him during the storm, and he'd been right. Era looked at the cat, who'd settled into his corner with the satisfaction of a job completed. "How do you know these things?" she asked. "How do you know when someone needs you?" Bramble, of course, didn't answer, but his purr rumbled through the quiet apartment, and Era thought she was beginning to understand. It wasn't magic, it wasn't mystical, it was simply attention, the kind of sustained, focused attention that most humans had forgotten how to give. Bramble noticed things, and then he responded. It was, Era thought, both completely ordinary and utterly extraordinary. Winter tightened its grip on the neighborhood as January arrived, bringing the kind of cold that made breathing hurt and transformed the morning walk into an exercise in survival. The snow from December's storm had been joined by 2 more significant accumulations, creating walls of white along the sidewalks where the plows had pushed it aside. Era invested in ice cleats for her boots and a warmer coat, and she made sure Bramble's reflective collar was always secure before he went out into the dark. The routine had become almost meditative. Bramble left at 9 each evening, returned by 11:30. His route was fixed, his schedule reliable. The GPS tracker's battery now charged on a strict Monday, Wednesday, Friday rotation, a habit Era had built into her week as firmly as grocery shopping or laundry. But routines, Era was learning, could conceal as much as they revealed. She noticed it first on a Sunday afternoon in mid-January. She was cleaning, a deep clean motivated by cabin fever more than actual mess, and had moved Bramble's bed to vacuum underneath it. Something rattled as she picked up the bed, and when she looked inside, she found a collection of small objects: 3 hair ties, 2 rubber bands, a twist tie from a bread bag, a small purple ribbon, and what looked like a piece of twine. All of them were lavender or purple. Era sat back on her heels, holding the collection in her palm. They were arranged deliberately, she realized, not just tossed together. The ribbon was coiled into a neat spiral. The twist tie was bent into a shape that might have been a loop. The rubber bands were stacked. These weren't random finds. This was a collection, maybe even an archive. "Bramble," she called. "Come here, please." He emerged from the kitchen where he'd been watching birds at the feeder outside her window. Another recent addition to their shared life, installed because Ira had noticed how intently he watched any movement outside. She showed him the objects. "Are these yours?" Bramble's whiskers twitched. He sniffed the collection, then gently, carefully took the purple ribbon in his teeth and carried it back to his bed. When Ira looked, he'd placed it in the exact center of the cushion, as if displaying it. "Where are you finding these?" she asked. but she thought she knew. The Hale apartment had that lavender blanket. Marjan had mentioned that her daughter always brought lavender sachets when she visited because purple was mother's color. And Alton had told her about Helen's lavender-scented laundry detergent, the smell that he associated with home and comfort and love. Bramble wasn't just visiting these places. He was gathering pieces of them, creating a physical record of connections that would otherwise exist only in memory and scent. Before we continue with the story, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support truly helps keep this channel alive and growing. That evening, as Bramble prepared for his rounds, Era made a decision. I'm coming with you tonight. Just this once. I want to see what you see. They left together at 9, the winter night sharp and clear. The cold bit through Era's layers immediately, and she wondered, not for the first time, how Bramble managed it. His coat was thick. She'd noticed it had grown denser since October, but still he was a small creature in a harsh environment. The walk to Maple Crest was familiar now, but Era tried to see it through Bramble's eyes, to notice what he might notice. The ice on the sidewalk, treacherous to her, was something he navigated with ease. The salt that the city spread made her boots crunch. Bramble carefully stepped around the thickest patches, perhaps finding it unpleasant on his paws. At Maple Crest, the evening staff had given Era her own keycard after the storm, a gesture that had touched her deeply. She used it now to enter through the main door, now accessible again with power restored, and followed Bramble inside. He went first to the laundry room as always, but tonight Era paid closer attention to what he did there. Yes, he sat on the warm towels. Yes, he seemed to draw comfort from the heat and the clean scent. But he also investigated the folded linens methodically, nose working. When he found a hand towel with a frayed lavender thread, he worried at it with his teeth until the thread came loose. Then he carried it in his mouth as he left the room. "So that's how you're doing it," Ira murmured. "You're not stealing. You're collecting pieces that are already coming loose." They went next to Alton's room. The old man was awake, sitting up in bed with a magazine he wasn't reading. His face lit up when Bramble entered. "There's my friend. Come in, come in. It's cold out there, isn't it? My Helen used to say that January was God's way of reminding New Englanders to appreciate April." Bramble jumped onto the bed and settled against Alton's side. The lavender thread was released from his mouth, placed on the blanket beside Alton's hand. The old man picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, smiled. "Lavender," he said. "Helen's color." "How did you know?" But of course Bramble had known because he'd been collecting these pieces for months, perhaps longer. He'd been building an archive of memory, a tangible record of what mattered to the people he visited. They stayed with Alton for 20 minutes. Era had learned to time Bramble's visits, and they rarely varied by more than a few minutes. Then Bramble indicated readiness to move on, jumping down from the bed with a soft chirp that Alton seemed to understand meant goodbye. "Until tomorrow," the old man said, and Era noticed the certainty in his voice. He knew Bramble would return. The routine had become a promise. Marjan was next. Her door was open. She kept it that way on the evenings Bramble visited, she'd told Era, so she wouldn't miss him if she dozed off. Tonight she was awake, sitting in her chair with the inhaler on the table beside her, ready for use after his visit, but unwilling to let allergies prevent it. "Hello, handsome," she said to Bramble, who jumped into her lap with a gentleness Era found remarkable. He never demanded, never imposed. He always approached as if asking permission. "I'm cold tonight," Marjan said, not to Bramble but to Era. "It's the arthritis. Cold weather makes everything ache." "I'm sorry. Don't be. It's just age. My body's getting ready to retire." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "My daughter says I'm being morbid, but I'm not afraid. I've had a good life. I'm just aware of the timeline, you know." Bramble in her lap began his signature kneading motion against her thigh. It looked like it might hurt. His claws were out slightly, but Marjan's expression was blissful. "He's massaging me," she said, laughing slightly. "My daughter pays someone $50 an hour to do this at that fancy spa in town. And here's Bramble, doing it for free." After 15 minutes, shorter than usual, Era noted, perhaps because of Marjan's allergies, they left. But before they did, Marjan called Era back. "Wait, I have something for him." She moved slowly to her dresser and pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside were several items: a spool of purple embroidery thread, a lavender sachet that had lost most of its scent, a purple hair scrunchie that looked like it was from the 1980s. These are things I don't need anymore. Would he want them? For whatever he's doing? Ira felt her throat tighten. How did you know? I saw him once arranging something in his mouth, very careful-like, and I thought about how we all save things that matter, how we all try to hold on to pieces of the people and places we've loved. Marjan's eyes were bright with tears. Let him have these. They'll matter to him more than they matter to me in a drawer. Bramble accepted the gift bag with delicate precision, taking the cloth handle in his mouth. He carried it all the way back to Ira's apartment, a small grey cat with a bag of purple memories. Over the next week, Ira watched Bramble's collection grow. The items from Marjan were added to the cache in his bed, arranged with the same meticulous care he gave everything, and she began to notice his behavior more closely during visits. At the Hale apartment, where she stopped by on a Tuesday evening to deliver a package that had been misdelivered to her door, she saw Bramble sitting on his usual spot on the couch. The lavender blanket was there, and Denton Hale was working at his laptop nearby while Sable fed the baby in the bedroom. He's been coming like clockwork, Denton told Ira. Tuesdays and Thursdays between 7:15 and 7:30. Stays about 20 minutes, leaves on his own. It's honestly the most reliable thing in my life right now. He laughed, but there was exhaustion in it. The baby's on no schedule at all. My work deadlines keep shifting, but Bramble I can count on. Ira noticed something on the couch cushion. Several loose threads from the blanket, lavender-colored. Bramble had clearly been working at them. She was about to mention it when Denton spoke first. I keep meaning to trim those threads. The blanket's getting old, coming apart at the edges. But honestly, he shrugged, it makes me feel better, knowing something's falling apart as fast as I am. So Ira said nothing about the threads. Let Bramble have them. They were pieces that would otherwise be lost to a vacuum cleaner or a trash bin. He was salvaging what people were ready to release, not taking what they wanted to keep. On a particularly cold Saturday in late January, Ira sat at her kitchen table with all of Bramble's collected items spread before her. She'd asked him for permission, feeling foolish as she did so, and he'd watched her carefully extract each piece from his bed, his expression attentive but not distressed. 11 items total now. The original 5 she'd found, Marjan's 3 contributions and 3 newer additions, a purple button, a frayed ribbon from what she guessed was the Hale blanket, and a small piece of lavender-dyed fabric that might have come from anywhere. She took a photo of the collection, documenting it in her Bramble journal, and added a note. He's not just visiting people and places. He's creating a material record of his route, his network. These items are tokens, markers of connection, like breadcrumbs, except he's not trying to find his way back. He already knows the way. He's trying to prove it exists, to make the invisible visible. That afternoon, when Marjan called to ask if Ira could bring Bramble for an extra visit, I'm having a hard day, she admitted. Ira brought the journal with her. They sat together in Marjan's room, Bramble curled in his careful way on the older woman's lap, while Ira read selected passages from the journal. The observations about timing, about behavior, about the ways Bramble navigated his world. You're documenting him, Marjan said. Creating a record. I suppose I am. That's what love looks like, you know. Attention. The kind of close, sustained attention that most people don't have the patience for anymore. She stroked Bramble's head gently. My late husband used to keep a log of what flowers bloomed when in our garden. Every day for 35 years, he'd note what was opening, what was fading. I thought it was obsessive, but after he died, I found all those notebooks, and I realized he wasn't just recording flowers, he was recording our life together, the rhythm of our years. Ira felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that settled like snow. You're saying the journal isn't about Bramble. It's about me learning to pay attention. I'm saying it's about both. That evening, after they'd returned home and Bramble had gone out for his regular rounds, Ira added one more note to the journal. Day 112. Bramble has taught me that belonging isn't about possession. It's about attention, about noticing, about showing up reliably and honoring what others value, even when you don't fully understand it. His collection of purple items isn't random or strange. It's how he demonstrates care, by preserving what matters to others. Maybe we should all keep such collections. Maybe we should all be so deliberate in our love. Outside, the January wind howled against the windows, but inside, Era's apartment was warm, and somewhere in the cold night, a grey cat moved between houses like a thread stitching together a community, carrying pieces of purple in his mouth, making the invisible visible one small token at a time. February brought paperwork, mountains of it, and Era discovered that formalizing love came with bureaucratic costs she hadn't anticipated. The HOA's 6-month trial period was approaching its end, which meant a review of Bramble's arrangement. Barbara, the board president, requested a meeting to discuss the continued viability of the shared custody agreement, a phrase that made Era's stomach clench with anxiety. They met in the community room of the main building, a space normally used for resident potlucks and book clubs. Barbara sat across from Era with a folder 3 inches thick, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her expression professionally neutral. "I want to be clear," Barbara began, "that this review isn't adversarial. The board has been impressed with your documentation and Bramble's behavior. However, we've received some concerns that need to be addressed." Concerns? Era's heart sank. Barbara opened the folder and extracted several printed emails. A resident on the 3rd floor says Bramble triggers her asthma. Someone in Building C claims he's responsible for paw prints on their car hood. And there's been an anonymous complaint about unsupervised animal traffic creating liability concerns. Era wanted to laugh or cry, or both. The woman with asthma, that's Mrs. Chen, and she's allergic to all cats. Bramble has never been near her apartment. The car hood prints could be any cat, and given how many outdoor cats we have in this neighborhood, it seems unfair to blame him without proof. And the liability concerns. She took a breath, forcing herself to stay calm. The liability concerns are addressed in the formal custody agreement, which includes insurance coverage through Maple Crest's therapy animal policy. Barbara made a note. I assumed as much. But the board needs these issues documented and resolved. She pulled out another sheet. Additionally, we need updated proof of vaccination, confirmation that the GPS tracking system is functioning, photos of the completed KTO installation, and a revised schedule showing Bramble's exact routes and timing. That's a lot of personal information about an animal. That's the price of the exception we're making. Barbara's expression softened slightly. Look, Era, I actually admire what you're doing. My mother was in a nursing home before she passed, and she would have loved having a cat like Bramble visit. But I'm accountable to hundreds of residents here, and if one person complains loudly enough, it can create problems for everyone. Era spent the next week gathering documentation. The vet provided updated vaccination records with a notarized letter. She took photos of Joe's handiwork on the KTO, a modest but functional enclosure that attached to her living room window, giving Bramble access to fresh air and outdoor smells without actually roaming free. She printed the GPS logs showing that Bramble never deviated from his established route and never entered any prohibited areas. The schedule was harder. Bramble's timing was precise, but not mechanical. He sometimes added stops, occasionally shortened visits. His Tuesday and Thursday detours to the Hale apartment had become regular only in December. Trying to predict and document every potential variation felt like trying to chart the wind. In the end, she created a typical schedule with footnoted exceptions and submitted it with a cover letter explaining that while cats weren't robots, Bramble was remarkably consistent in his patterns. Barbara accepted the paperwork with a thin smile. The board will review this at our next meeting. You should have an answer within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Era found herself second-guessing everything. Should she have been more formal in her language, less defensive? Should she have brought Bramble to the meeting as a character witness? The answer, when it finally came, was mixed. The HOA approved Bramble's continued presence for another 6 months, but with additional restrictions. He had to wear a bell on his collar so residents could hear him coming, his GPS logs had to be submitted monthly instead of quarterly, and the KTO had to be inspected twice a year by a licensed contractor to ensure it remained secure. A bell? Era said to Linda Chen over the phone, her frustration boiling over. He's not a danger. He's not sneaking up on people. He's just existing. I know, Linda said soothingly, but look at it this way. You won. They approved the extension. Yes, there are conditions, but you get to keep doing what you're doing. It's not just about me. It's about treating Bramble like a liability instead of a community member. Sometimes, Linda said carefully, the price of being exceptional is extra scrutiny. Normal cats don't have shared custody agreements. Normal cats don't have GPS trackers and monthly reports. But Bramble's not a normal cat, and you're not a normal caretaker. You're both doing something extraordinary, and extraordinary things come with extraordinary paperwork. The bell bothered Era more than she wanted to admit. It felt like a violation of who Bramble was, a creature of quiet observation, of gentle presence. Making him audible seemed wrong, like forcing an introvert to shout their arrival at every room. But when she attached the small silver bell to his collar that evening, Bramble didn't seem to mind. He shook his head once, making it jingle, then accepted it with his usual philosophical grace, and Ira had to admit, grudgingly, that the sound was pleasant, a soft chiming that announced his movements without being obtrusive. Still, the whole experience left her unsettled. She'd thought that formalizing Bramble's arrangement would protect him, would make everything legitimate and secure. Instead, it had made everything more precarious, more conditional. They were always one complaint, one board vote, one policy change away from losing it all. The financial costs were mounting too. The GPS tracker's monthly fee was $30. The mandated biannual CATIO inspections would run at least $100 each time. The therapy animal certification required annual renewal with a fee and a behavioral assessment. And then there were the normal costs of cat ownership: food, litter, vet visits, medications. Era sat at her kitchen table one evening, calculator in hand, adding up the expenses. In the 5 months since finding Bramble, she'd spent over $1,200 beyond her normal budget. It wasn't bankrupting her, but it wasn't trivial either. "You're expensive," she told Bramble, who was watching her from his corner. "You know that?" He blinked slowly, the feline equivalent of a kiss. Yeah, you're worth it, I know." But the money mattered. It limited her flexibility, forced her to say no to other things. She'd skipped her annual physical because the copay felt too expensive. She'd been eating more rice and beans, less meat and fresh vegetables. She'd stopped contributing to her retirement fund temporarily. These were choices she was making willingly, consciously, but they were still costs. At Maple Crest, similar complications were emerging. The facility's insurance company had gotten wind of Bramble's presence and requested documentation of his therapy animal certification, proof of vaccination, and evidence that appropriate safety protocols were in place. Linda spent a week compiling responses, pulling Era into hastily scheduled meetings with the facility administrator. "The insurance isn't going to deny coverage," the administrator assured them, a harried woman named Susan who looked like she survived on coffee and stress. "But they're requiring that we update our pet policy, create formal visitor logs for Bramble, and ensure that any resident with allergies or animal-related trauma is informed before he visits their floor." "Bramble doesn't visit every floor," Linda pointed out. "He has specific destinations. Then we need those destinations documented, and we need confirmation that residents in those areas consent to his presence." More paperwork, more forms, more signatures. Margine signed her consent form eagerly, chatting about how much she looked forward to Bramble's visits despite her allergies. Alton signed his too, though he seemed confused about why it was necessary. "He's family," the old man said. "You don't need permission for family." But 2 other residents on Alton's floor declined to sign, citing allergies and fear of animals respectively. The facility's solution was to post notices on those doors: "Please ensure therapy animal does not enter this room," which Bramble, of course, couldn't read. "We'll be responsible for making sure he doesn't go in those rooms," Linda told Era. "The night staff will keep track of his movements." So now the staff is tracking him too. "It's not ideal," Linda admitted, "but it's what we need to do to keep the arrangement legal and protected." Era went home that evening feeling exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. She'd thought love was simple. You cared for someone, they cared for you. That was it. But institutionalizing love, making it official and documented and legally protected, required navigating systems designed for control, not connection. She found herself thinking about all the people who didn't have the time, resources, or stubbornness to fight these battles. How many potential Brambles were out there, never making their rounds because the paperwork was too daunting? How many communities were fragmented because the cost of connection was measured in forms and fees and regulations? That night, when Bramble returned from his rounds, Era noticed something new. He was moving more slowly, his steps careful and measured. At first she thought he might be cold. It was below 0 outside, but when he came inside and she examined him, she found small cuts on his paw pads. The salt, she said, horrified. "The salt on the sidewalks is cutting your feet." She spent an hour cleaning and treating the cuts with antiseptic and antibiotic ointment, Bramble tolerating her ministrations with patient resignation. Then she ordered booties online, protective coverings for his paws, despite the absurd expense and her skepticism that he'd actually wear them. When they arrived 3 days later, Bramble's reaction was predictably unenthusiastic. He lifted each booted paw in turn, shaking it vigorously as if trying to dislodge a piece of tape. He walked with an exaggerated prancing gait that would have been comical if Era wasn't so worried about his paws. But after 20 minutes, he adjusted. And when he went out that evening for his rounds, the booties stayed on. Era tracked his progress on the GPS, half expecting him to come home barefoot, but all 4 booties returned intact. "You're adapting," she told him, as she removed them and checked his paws, which were blessedly uncut. "Just like I'm adapting. We're both learning to navigate systems that weren't designed for us." Bramble's purr suggested agreement, or at least acceptance. In her journal that night, Era wrote, "Day 143, sometimes love requires compromise. Sometimes it requires adapting to rules that seem arbitrary or unfair. But the alternative, giving up, walking away, choosing the easier path, means losing something precious. Bramble wears booties now. I submit monthly reports. We both carry costs that once seemed unimaginable, but we're still here, still connected, still mattering to each other and to everyone else in his network. That has to count for something." A week later, the HOA board sent official approval for the 6-month extension. Attached was a note from Barbara. "The board was impressed by your thoroughness and dedication. Several members mentioned that Bramble has become a positive fixture in the community. Keep up the good work." It wasn't effusive praise, but Era found herself smiling anyway. They'd won, for now, for 6 more months. And in the world of bureaucracy and regulations, sometimes, for now, was the best you could hope for. March arrived with the kind of false promise that characterized New England springs. A few days of warmth that made people prematurely pack away their winter coats, followed by a late-season snowstorm that reminded everyone that winter wasn't actually finished yet. But even the capricious weather couldn't hide the changes. Days were noticeably longer. The snow was melting, creating rivulets of water that ran down the gutters and pooled in low spots on the sidewalks. The salt stains on Era's boots were giving way to mud, and the birds, absent or silent for months, had returned with their territorial singing. Era noticed changes in Bramble too. His coat, which had thickened dramatically over the winter, was beginning to shed in great tufts that collected in corners and on furniture. He spent more time grooming, more time sitting in patches of sunlight that grew stronger each day. And his collection of purple items, dormant through the coldest months, suddenly expanded. He brought home 3 new pieces in 1 week: a lavender ribbon from somewhere, a piece of purple yarn, and, most remarkably, a small silk violet that looked like it had come from a craft store or a decorative arrangement. "Where are you finding these?" Era asked, examining the silk flower. It was slightly dusty but otherwise pristine. Bramble, of course, didn't answer. But the next evening, Era decided to follow him again. Curious about his extended spring routes, she gave him a 5-minute head start, then set out with her phone's GPS tracker app open. The evening was mild, barely requiring a jacket, and the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold that made the whole neighborhood look kinder than it usually did. Bramble's route was familiar until he reached Maple Crest. Then, instead of entering immediately, he turned left and walked another block to a small park that Era hadn't realized was there. It was more of a pocket park, really, a small green space with a few benches, a memorial tree with a plaque, and some spring bulbs just beginning to push through the thawing earth. An elderly man sat on one of the benches, bundled in a coat despite the mild weather. When he saw Bramble, his face transformed. "There you are. I was hoping you'd come by." Era hung back, not wanting to intrude, but the man noticed her. "Are you with him? The grey cat?" "In a manner of speaking. I'm Era. I help take care of him." "I'm Harold Graves. I used to see this fellow all the time, back before the snow got too deep for my old bones to handle walks." He gestured to the bench beside him. "Please sit. Any friend of this cat's is welcome company." They sat together while Bramble investigated the emerging crocuses near the base of the memorial tree. Harold explained that he lived in a building across from the park, that he'd been coming here every evening for years to watch the sunset. "My wife Joan and I used to come here together. This was our spot. After she passed, 3 years ago now, I kept coming. It felt important, to maintain the routine. He smiled sadly. The cat started showing up maybe 2 years ago. He'd sit with me for a few minutes, then move on. I always wondered where he came from, where he went. Seemed like a creature with a purpose. He visits several people, Era explained. Has a whole route. You're part of it. Harold's eyes brightened with tears. I'm part of his route. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years. They talked until the sunset faded and the streetlights came on. Harold told her about Joan, about their 52 years of marriage, about the grief that still ambushed him at odd moments. Era told him about Bramble's network, about Alton and Margine and the Hales, about the way the cat seemed to understand who needed him. You should add me to that list, Harold said. The official one, with the animal shelter or whoever keeps track. I'd like to be counted among the people he cares for. So Harold Graves became the newest addition to Bramble's documented network. And the silk violet, Era learned, had come from a memorial arrangement someone had left at the tree. The same tree Joan Graves had helped plant 15 years earlier as part of a neighborhood beautification project. Bramble had been collecting pieces of Harold's grief, just as he collected pieces of everyone else's memories. As the days lengthened and warmed, Bramble's schedule shifted slightly. He started leaving earlier in the evenings, 8:30 instead of 9, and his morning patrols around the building became longer. The GPS tracker showed him making additional stops, exploring areas that had been inaccessible during winter's worst weather. Era found herself with more free time as Bramble's absences lengthened. At first she worried. Was he pulling away? Was the connection weakening? But then she realized he was simply expanding, not leaving. His network was growing, incorporating more people, more places. She spent a Tuesday evening having dinner with Sable and Denton Hale, who'd invited her up when they'd crossed paths in the lobby. The baby, now 6 months old and starting to sit up, grabbed at Bramble with enthusiastic, uncoordinated hands. Bramble tolerated the attention with remarkable patience. He's been a lifesaver, Sable admitted, nursing a glass of wine while Denton handled baby duty. That first month after we brought her home, I was so overwhelmed. I felt like I'd lost myself completely. And then this cat showed up on our schedule twice a week like clockwork. It gave me something to look forward to, something stable when everything else felt chaotic. Having a cat with a scheduled commute is objectively bizarre, Denton added, laughing. But somehow it works. Like I know that on Tuesday evenings, between 7:15 and 7:30, I can take 20 minutes to just exist. Not be working, not be parenting, just be. Era felt something warm bloom in her chest. That's what he does. He creates these little pockets of peace. He's a meditation bell, Sable said, ringing at the same times, reminding us to pause. The metaphor stayed with Era for days. A meditation bell. Yes, that's exactly what Bramble was. A gentle, regular signal to stop, to breathe, to notice. In early April, Linda Chen called with news that made Era's stomach drop. Mr. Grieve is declining, she said quietly. Nothing acute, just the general trajectory. His doctor thinks he has maybe weeks, possibly months. Does he know? He knows, and he's not afraid. But he asked if Bramble could visit more often. Not every night. That might be disruptive to the cat's routine, but maybe a few extra visits when he's having hard days. Of course, whatever he needs. Alton's room had changed since Ira's last visit. The photos on the dresser had been rearranged to give pride of place to a large portrait of a younger Alton and Helen, both smiling at the camera with the easy joy of people who didn't yet know how short their time would be. A hospice folder sat on the nightstand, its presence an undeniable marker of what was coming. Alton himself looked smaller, frailer, but his eyes still lit up when Bramble entered. "There's my faithful friend," he said, his voice thin but warm. "Come here, come here." Bramble jumped onto the bed with his usual grace, settling into the curve of Alton's body. The old man's hands, trembling slightly, found Bramble's fur and began the familiar stroking motion. "I've been thinking," Alton said to Era, who'd taken the chair beside the bed, "about what happens after, when I'm gone. You don't have to. I want to. It's important." He paused to catch his breath. Helen used to say that love was an action, not a feeling, that the feeling part was easy, chemistry, attraction, all that, but the action part, the showing up day after day, even when it's hard, that was the real thing. He looked at Bramble. This cat understands that. He shows up, For me, for Marjan, for whoever needs him. He acts on his love. He does, Era agreed softly. When I'm gone, he'll keep showing up. Maybe not here, there won't be a reason anymore, but somewhere, for someone. Alton's voice grew thick. I want you to let him. Don't try to keep him safe at home. Don't try to protect him from his own purpose. I won't, Era promised. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the three of them, while the afternoon light gradually faded outside the window. Bramble's purr was steady, rhythmic, a heartbeat that seemed to calm the room. When they finally left, Alton was sleeping peacefully, one hand still resting on Bramble's back. He's ready, Linda said quietly in the hallway. He's made peace with it. But I haven't, Era admitted. None of us ever are. That's the price of loving someone. That evening, Era sat at her kitchen table with her Bramble journal and tried to write about the visit, about Alton's words, about the certainty that soon there would be one fewer stop on Bramble's route. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself sketching, something she hadn't done since high school, trying to capture Bramble's face, the wisdom in those amber eyes. The sketch was amateurish and clumsy, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the attention, the attempt to capture something ephemeral before it slipped away. Spring continued its tentative arrival. The crocuses in the park gave way to daffodils. The maple trees budded and leafed out. The temperature climbed into the 50s, then the 60s. People emerged from their winter hibernation, filling the sidewalks with joggers and dog walkers and parents pushing strollers. And Bramble, as always, made his rounds. One evening in late April, Era received a text from Harold Graves. Can you bring Bramble by the park tomorrow evening? I have something to show him. The next day they found Harold at his usual bench, but the park had been transformed. Someone, or many someones, had planted an entire border of flowers around the memorial tree. Purple and lavender blooms everywhere, crocuses, hyacinths, grape hyacinths, early blooming salvia. The neighborhood association helped, Harold explained, his face glowing with pride. I told them about Joan, about her love of purple flowers, and they organized this planting day. 20 people showed up. We did it all in one afternoon. Bramble walked among the flowers, sniffing carefully, his tail up in contentment. I wanted him to see it, Harold continued, because it was his visits that gave me the courage to ask. I'd been too sad, too stuck in my grief, but watching him make his rounds, seeing how he connected all these people, I thought maybe I could do something similar, create something that would keep Joan's memory alive in the community. Era felt tears on her cheeks. It's beautiful. It's a beginning, Harold said. A way forward that doesn't mean forgetting backward. That phrase echoed in Era's mind as they walked home. A way forward that doesn't mean forgetting backward. That was what Bramble had been showing them all along. That moving forward didn't require abandoning the past. That you could honor memory and embrace change simultaneously. That belonging was something you built deliberately, with attention and action, not something that simply happened to you. In her journal that night, Ira wrote, Day 207. Spring is teaching me about cycles. Things end, winter, lives, arrangements, but endings create space for beginnings. Alton's time is ending, but Harold's renewal is beginning. Bramble witnessed both and held space for both. Maybe that's the deepest form of love, witnessing without judgment, holding space without trying to fix or change anything, just being present while others experience their seasons. The next morning, Era woke to a voicemail from Linda Chen. Call me when you get this. It's about Mr. Grieve. Alton had passed away peacefully in his sleep, Linda told her. Bramble had been there the evening before, one of his regular visits. The night nurse said Alton had seemed settled, content. He was ready, Linda said again, and Bramble gave him that gift, knowing he was loved, knowing he wouldn't be forgotten. That evening, Bramble left for his rounds at the usual time. Era watched him on the GPS tracker, watched him approach Maple Crest, watched him pause. The GPS signal stopped moving right outside the building. For 15 minutes, Bramble remained in place. Then he moved on, skipping Maple Crest entirely, going directly to Marjan's floor via the emergency entrance he somehow still accessed. He knows, Era whispered to her empty apartment. He knows Alton's gone. But the next evening, and the evening after that, Bramble's route remained changed. He no longer stopped at Alton's room. That connection, that thread, had been completed. Yet the network continued, adapted, endured. May brought warmth that finally felt reliable, the kind of gentle heat that made people remember why they tolerated New England winters. The trees were fully leafed out, creating dappled shade on the sidewalks where Era and Bramble walked. The catio saw regular use now, Bramble spending his afternoons there watching birds and squirrels with an intensity that was pure predator despite his gentle demeanor. Alton's memorial service was held at Maple Crest on a Tuesday afternoon. Era attended, along with Linda, Marjan, several other residents, and a small handful of Alton's family members, a daughter from Vermont, a grandson who looked to be in his 30s, a great-granddaughter who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The daughter, whose name was Patricia, sought out Era after the service. "Linda told me about you and the cat, about how regularly he visited my father. Your father was wonderful," Era said. "He told beautiful stories about your mother." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. He did love his stories. Toward the end, they were sometimes the only thing he remembered clearly. She paused. "I want to thank you for facilitating those visits, for giving him that companionship. I live 3 hours away. I couldn't be here as often as I wanted, and knowing he wasn't alone means everything." "He was never alone," Ira assured her. Bramble made sure of that. After the service, as Ira walked home through the warm afternoon, she thought about Patricia's gratitude and felt a complex mix of emotions. She was glad she'd helped, glad Bramble had been there for Alton, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. The knowledge that Bramble's network depended on her facilitation, her paperwork, her continued navigation of HOA rules and shelter regulations, and all the bureaucracy that made the extraordinary possible. What would happen if she couldn't continue? If she got sick or had to move or simply burned out on the constant management? That evening, she raised the question with Linda during one of their regular check-ins. They'd fallen into a pattern of weekly calls, updating each other on Bramble's activities and any changes in the residents' needs. "I've been thinking about that too," Linda admitted. "About succession planning, basically. What happens if you're not available? What happens to the formal custody arrangement? I don't have a good answer. Maybe we need to build a broader support network. Not just you as the primary caretaker, but a team of people who understand Bramble's routine and could step in if needed." Linda sounded energized by the idea. Like a board of directors for a cat. It should have sounded ridiculous, but Era found herself nodding. "Who would we include?" "Me, obviously. Marjan, if her health allows. Maybe Harold. He's become pretty invested, and what about the Hales? Would they be interested?" Over the next month, they assembled what they jokingly called the Bramble Committee. 6 people total. Era as primary caretaker and coordinator, Linda as the Maple Crest liaison, Marjan as a resident advocate, Harold as the community representative, Sable Hale as the young family connection, and surprisingly Barbara from the HOA, who'd been impressed enough by Bramble's documentation to want to ensure his arrangement was sustainable long-term. Their first meeting was held in Maple Crest's community room on a sunny Sunday afternoon. Bramble himself attended, sitting on the table in the center like a very calm chairman of the board. "I feel ridiculous," Harold admitted, laughing. "Having a formal meeting about a cat. We're having a formal meeting about community care," Linda corrected gently. "Bramble is just the catalyst." They spent 2 hours developing protocols and backup plans. If Era was unavailable, Linda would ensure Bramble had access to Maple Crest and his regular residence there. If Linda was unavailable, Sable would be the backup contact for the facility. Harold agreed to maintain a weekly visual check on Bramble during his park visits, reporting any concerning behavior or physical changes. Marjan, despite her health limitations, wanted to be informed of any changes to Bramble's status so she could advocate within the facility. "What about veterinary emergencies?" Barbara asked, ever practical. "Who has permission to make medical decisions?" They drafted a shared care agreement that designated Era as primary decision-maker, with Linda and Harold as secondary contacts with medical authorization. Copies of Bramble's veterinary records were distributed to all committee members. Emergency contact numbers were established. "This is more organized than most families," Sable observed, nursing a cup of coffee while her husband handled their daughter at home. "We've created a formal care network that most humans don't have." "Maybe that's the point," Linda said. "Maybe we should all have this kind of support structure." The committee agreed to meet monthly with emergency meetings as needed. They established a shared email group and a text thread for quick updates. Barbara volunteered to handle the HOA reporting requirements, taking that burden off Era's shoulders. By the time the meeting ended, Era felt simultaneously exhausted and relieved. The responsibility hadn't lessened. If anything, it had expanded, but at least it was shared now. Bramble's network had a network. Summer deepened, bringing the kind of heat that made walking at midday uncomfortable. Bramble adjusted his schedule again, going out later in the evenings when the temperature dropped. His collection of purple items had stabilized at 19 pieces, now carefully arranged in his bed in a pattern only he understood. Era noticed that he visited Harold's park bench more frequently now, sometimes stopping there both on his way to Maple Crest and on his way back. The flowers around Joan's memorial tree were thriving, creating a purple oasis that had become a gathering point for neighbors. People leave things there now, Harold told Era during one of her visits. Flowers, notes, small mementos. It's become a sort of community memorial, not just for Joan, but for anyone who's lost someone they love. Bramble inspired that. His collection of purple items, his way of honoring memory through tangible things, it gave other people permission to do the same. In July, Marjan's health declined sharply. Her allergies worsened, her breathing became more labored, and her doctor recommended limiting all animal contact. "I can't see him anymore," she told Era, tears streaming down her face. "The doctor says my reactions are getting severe enough to be dangerous, but I don't want to say goodbye. I don't want to be removed from his route." Linda found a solution. Marjan could watch Bramble through her window. Her room overlooked one of the main sidewalks, and if Bramble paused there during his rounds, as he'd begun to do unprompted, she could see him, wave to him, maintain the connection without the physical contact that triggered her allergies. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And Bramble, somehow understanding the new arrangement, began stopping beneath Marjan's window every evening, sitting for precisely 5 minutes before continuing his route. She'd wave from above, he'd look up at her, and the connection held. "It's enough," Marjan told Era. "Just knowing he's there, that he hasn't forgotten me even though I can't touch him anymore. That's enough." But Era wondered if it was enough, if maintaining connection through glass and distance was truly fulfilling, or just the best they could do given the constraints. She added a note to her journal. Day 287. Learning that love sometimes means adapting to limitations rather than breaking through them. Marjan can't hold Bramble anymore, but she can still see him. Harold can't bring Joan back, but he can tend her memorial. I can't eliminate the HOA regulations, but I can navigate them. Maybe this is what maturity looks like, accepting what is while still working toward what could be. In August, the Bramble Committee held their 3rd monthly meeting. The reports were overwhelmingly positive. Bramble's health was excellent, his behavior consistent, his network stable. Barbara announced that the HOA board had voted to eliminate the bell requirement after multiple residents complained that they actually liked the sound of his silent approach. "Apparently," Barbara said with a wry smile, "there's a petition circulating to make Bramble the official community cat. I told them that's not how HOA governance works, but the sentiment is there." "What does that mean for the custody arrangement?" Era asked. "It means you have broader community support than I initially realized. That makes my job easier." The meeting adjourned with a sense of accomplishment. They were making it work. Against all odds, through all obstacles, they were sustaining something precious. That evening, as Bramble left for his rounds, Era found herself watching him with different eyes. He wasn't just a cat anymore, if he ever had been. He was a living bridge, a thread stitching together a community that might otherwise have remained a collection of isolated individuals. He was proof that connection was possible, that belonging could be built deliberately and maintained with attention. He was, in his own quiet way, revolutionary. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of him walking down the sidewalk, his collar glinting in the late summer light, his tail up in confidence. Then she added it to a folder she'd been building for months, a visual archive of Bramble's journey. Someday, she thought, this story should be told. Not just in her private journal, but publicly, so other people could see what was possible, so other communities could understand that caring for each other didn't have to be complicated, it just had to be consistent. But tonight, the story was just for her, for the committee, for the small network of people who'd been changed by a grey cat with a remarkable memory and an instinct for who needed him. Tonight, that was enough. September arrived with the particular quality of light that only comes at summer's end, golden and slanting, throwing long shadows that made everything look more significant than it was. The first yellow leaves appeared on the maple trees. The morning air had a bite that promised autumn. And Gera, who'd been managing Bramble's complex network for nearly a year, was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. The HOA had sent another round of documentation requests, this time about liability insurance and whether Bramble's catio required a building permit after all. The animal shelter needed updated vaccination records, even though Bramble's shots weren't due for 3 more months. Maple Crest's insurance company had questions about the therapy animal designation and wanted additional behavioral assessments. Ira spent 3 evenings handling paperwork after her full workday, her eyes burning from screen fatigue, her shoulders tight with stress. She'd begun to resent the very systems she'd fought so hard to navigate. Why was it this difficult to simply care for a cat who brought joy to so many people? On a Thursday in mid-September, everything came apart at once. The GPS tracker, the one item the HOA absolutely required, malfunctioned. Not the battery this time, but the device itself. The collar attachment broke, leaving the tracker dangling useless from Bramble's harness. Ira discovered it when she checked the app before bed and found that Bramble's location hadn't updated in 3 hours. Panic set in immediately. He could be anywhere. Hurt, lost, trapped. She threw on shoes and a jacket and ran outside, calling his name in the darkness. She found him 45 minutes later, sitting calmly outside her building's main entrance, apparently having finished his route without incident, despite her terror. When she picked him up, relief and frustration warred in her chest. "You can't do this," she told him, her voice shaking. I can't keep tracking you and reporting you and documenting every move you make. It's exhausting, and it's turning me into someone who sees you as a liability instead of a companion." Bramble bumped his head against her chin, his version of an apology or reassurance, she wasn't sure which. Inside, she sent an emergency email to the Bramble Committee explaining the GPS failure. Barbara responded within an hour, surprisingly given the late hour, with news that made Ira's heart sink. The HOA board wants to revisit the entire arrangement at next month's meeting. Several residents have complained about the paperwork burden on community resources. This GPS failure is going to be used as evidence that the current system isn't working. Ira stared at the email, feeling the weight of it like a physical thing pressing on her chest. After everything, after a year of navigation and documentation and compromise, they might lose it all because of a broken GPS tracker. She wanted to quit. She wanted to tell them all to handle it themselves, to figure out their own solutions, to leave her alone to just love Bramble without turning it into a bureaucratic nightmare. But the next morning, before she could send her resignation to the committee, Marjan called. "I heard about the GPS," she said without preamble. "Are we losing him?" "I don't know," Ira admitted. "I'm so tired, Marjan. I don't know if I can keep fighting these battles." There was silence on the line. "Then, can I tell you a story?" "Of course." "When my husband was dying, this was 30 years ago now, I had to fight with the insurance company for every single day of home hospice. They wanted to send him to a facility, said it would be cheaper, easier to manage. But he wanted to die at home in our bed looking at the garden he'd planted." Marjan's voice was steady but thick with emotion. "I spent hours on the phone, filing appeals, gathering documentation. I was exhausted. I wanted to give up, let them move him, make it all easier on myself. But you didn't," Ira said softly. "But I didn't. Because some fights are worth the exhaustion. Some things matter more than our own comfort." She paused. "Bramble matters. Not just to you, but to all of us. And if the systems are failing him, then we need to change the systems, not give up." After they hung up, Ira sat with her coffee and thought about systems, about how they were designed to manage and control rather than facilitate and support, about how they turned care into paperwork, connection into liability, love into burden. And she realized the systems were wrong. Not she, not Bramble, not the community, the systems. She called an emergency meeting of the Bramble Committee for that evening. All 6 of them gathered in Maple Crest's community room, with Bramble present as always, their silent, centering presence. "I'm done playing their game," Ira announced without preamble. "The HOA, the insurance companies, all the people who want documentation and proof and tracking data. I'm done pretending their concerns are reasonable." Barbara looked alarmed. "Ira, Let me finish. I'm not saying we stop complying. I'm saying we change the conversation. We stop acting like Bramble is an exception that needs to be tolerated. We start acting like he's an example of what community care should look like. Era pulled out a folder she'd prepared. I did some research. Other communities have similar arrangements. Therapy animals, shared pet custody, community cats. There's precedent. There's evidence it improves resident well-being and community cohesion. You want to change HOA policy, Barbara said slowly. For an entire community based on one cat. I want to create a framework that makes this kind of care normal, not exceptional. So the next person who wants to facilitate community connection doesn't have to fight as hard as I did. Harold leaned forward. That's ambitious. That's necessary, Linda corrected. Because Ara's right. We've been accepting their framing, that Bramble is a special case requiring special permission. But what if the framing is wrong? What if community care animals should be the default, not the exception? What followed was 3 hours of intense discussion, debate, and planning. They drafted a proposal for a new HOA policy, Community Pet Care Guidelines. It would establish clear protocols for shared pet custody, therapy animals, and community cat programs. It would remove arbitrary restrictions like GPS tracking and replace them with common-sense guidelines about animal health, behavior, and supervision. The HOA can reject this, Barbara warned. They probably will at first. HOAs don't like change. Then we get the broader community involved, Sable said. We talk to neighbors, organize support, show up to board meetings. We make this a community issue, not just Era's personal problem. Over the next 2 weeks, the Bramble Committee became a grassroots organizing force. They printed flyers explaining the proposed policy change and distributed them to every mailbox in the community. They organized a petition, digital and physical, gathering signatures from residents who supported broader animal access. They reached out to local media, pitching the story of a community cat who'd improved quality of life for dozens of people. A reporter from the local newspaper showed up on a Tuesday evening, meeting Era and Bramble at Harold's park bench. She interviewed Harold about Joan's memorial, spoke with Linda about Bramble's impact on Maple Crest residents, and talked to Marjan via video call about maintaining connection despite health limitations. The article ran on Sunday, front page of the local section, with a photo of Bramble sitting beside Joan's purple flowers. Community cat creates connection across generations. The response was overwhelming. Era's phone rang constantly with calls from people sharing their own stories of animals who'd created community, of systems that had prevented rather than facilitated care. The committee's email inbox filled with offers of support, resources, contacts with other HOAs who'd successfully changed their policies. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the last Thursday of September. The community room was packed, standing room only, people spilling into the hallway. Era had never seen so many residents in one place. Barbara, in her role as board president, called the meeting to order. The tension was palpable. We have several items on tonight's agenda, she began, but I know most of you are here about one issue in particular, the proposal for revised community pet care guidelines. She paused, looked directly at Era, and smiled. I'm pleased to report that the board has reviewed the proposal, considered the community feedback and voted, unanimously, to adopt the new guidelines effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Era felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. The new guidelines eliminated the GPS tracking requirement, replaced monthly reporting with quarterly check-ins, and established clear, manageable standards for animals who provided community benefit. The catio inspection requirement was reduced to annually instead of twice yearly, and most importantly, the policy framed community animals as assets, not liabilities. This doesn't mean unlimited animals everywhere, Barbara clarified once the room quieted. It means we have a framework for evaluating requests fairly and consistently. It means we're acknowledging that pets can be community members, not just private property. After the meeting, dozens of people approached Era to thank her, to share their own stories, to ask about bringing similar arrangements to their buildings or neighborhoods. Harold was crying openly, talking about how Joan would have loved seeing community come together like this. Linda was already planning to use the new policy as a model for other senior facilities, and Bramble, through it all, sat calmly on Era's lap, accepting pets from strangers with his characteristic patient grace. Walking home that night, the September air crisp and clear, Era felt something release in her chest. The fight wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new obstacles, but they'd changed the game. They'd proven that the systems could be reimagined, that care could be normalized rather than penalized. In her journal that night, she wrote, Day 347. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to accept the limits others place on it. Sometimes revolution looks like paperwork and policy changes. Sometimes changing the world starts with a single grey cat who knew something we'd forgotten, that belonging doesn't require permission, it requires action. And sometimes, when the systems fail, that's not a reason to give up. It's an invitation to build better systems. Outside her window, the moon was rising, full and bright. And somewhere in the neighborhood, connections were being maintained. One patient visit at a time. October returned. 1 full year since Era had first found Bramble behind the dumpster, looking lost but knowing exactly where he needed to go. The anniversary felt significant, worth marking, though Era wasn't sure how one celebrated a year of shared custody, community organizing and bureaucratic victories. The new HOA guidelines had been in place for 2 weeks, and already Era had fielded 3 calls from residents in other buildings asking about establishing similar arrangements for their pets. The local animal shelter had requested a meeting to discuss replicating the model for their therapy animal program. And perhaps most surprising, the Maple Crest management had voted to officially recognize Bramble as their first resident therapy animal, complete with a plaque in the lobby and a small monthly budget for his care. You're famous, Era told Bramble one morning while fixing her coffee. You've become the poster child for community care. Bramble, washing his face in a patch of October sunlight, seemed supremely unconcerned with his newfound status. The weather had turned cool again, the cycle completing itself. The leaves were changing, reds and oranges and yellows painting the neighborhood in fire. The air smelled like wood smoke and approaching winter, and Bramble's coat was already beginning to thicken in preparation for the cold months ahead. His evening routine remained unchanged. Out at 8:30, return by 11. His route had evolved slightly. Harold's bench was now an every evening stop rather than occasional, and he'd added a brief visit to a new elderly couple on the 2nd floor of Era's building who'd moved in over the summer. But the core pattern held: Maple Crest, Margine's window, Harold's bench, home. His collection of purple items had stabilized at 23 pieces, which he now arranged in what Era had come to recognize as a spiral pattern in his bed. Oldest items on the outside, newest in the center. It was a physical timeline, a tangible history of connection. On the actual anniversary, October 23rd, exactly 1 year from the day she'd found him, Era organized a small gathering. Not a party exactly, but an acknowledgement. She invited the Bramble Committee, along with a few other community members who'd become part of their extended network. They met at Harold's park bench in the late afternoon. The weather cooperated, providing one of those gift days where autumn feels generous rather than foreboding. Harold had brought juice boxes and cookies, a charming touch that made everyone smile. Linda brought a photo album documenting Bramble's visits to Maple Crest over the past year. Sable and Denton attended with their daughter, now almost a year old herself and reaching enthusiastically for Bramble. Should we make speeches? Harold asked, half joking. Seems like we should say something profound. I'll start, Marjane said. She'd come in a wheelchair pushed by one of the Maple Crest staff, her inhaler in hand but determination in her eyes. Bramble taught me that love doesn't end when proximity becomes difficult. That connection can survive through windows and distance. That the bond between souls isn't dependent on touch. Linda went next. He taught me that bureaucracy and compassion aren't opposites, that systems can be changed when enough people care enough to try. He reminded me, Harold said, his voice thick with emotion, that Joan's memory could be active rather than passive, that honoring the dead means creating life, planting flowers, building community. Sable wiped away tears. He gave us permission to pause. In a phase of life that's all chaos and noise, he created pockets of calm just by showing up reliably. Barbara surprisingly had tears in her eyes too. He made me question what community means, what our obligations to each other are, whether rules serve people or people serve rules. When everyone looked at Era, she found herself momentarily speechless. What could she add that wasn't already said? He taught me that I was lonely, she finally managed. I'd been telling myself I was fine, that I'd adjusted to my empty nest, that independence was enough, but I was lonely. And he showed me that connection was still possible, that community could be chosen and built rather than stumbled into, that love, real love, requires work and compromise and showing up even when it's hard. They stood in silence for a moment, watching Bramble investigate the purple flowers around Joan's memorial tree. Then Harold raised his juice box. "To Bramble," he said. "The cat who built a community." "To Bramble," they echoed. That evening, as the sun set and the October air turned cold, Era walked home with Bramble beside her. They moved slowly, both of them, no rush. At the park entrance, Bramble paused and looked back at the memorial tree, the flowers, the bench where Harold would return tomorrow and the day after that. "You created something," Era told him. "You know that, right? Not just for yourself, but for all of us." Bramble meowed once, soft and conversational, then continued walking. Inside her apartment, their apartment really, as much his as hers, Era made tea and settled on the couch with her journal. One final entry for the anniversary. Day 365. Full circle. The leaves are falling again. The cold is returning, but this time I'm not facing it alone. This time I'm part of something larger than myself. Bramble's root has become my root. His community has become my community. And the lesson he's been teaching all along has finally sunk in. Belonging isn't about finding the perfect place or the perfect people. It's about showing up consistently, paying attention deliberately, and honoring what matters to others, even when you don't fully understand why it matters. He brought home a stray cat, the title says, but I was the stray. I was the one lost and displaced by life's changes, trying to reconstruct a sense of purpose and connection. Bramble just happened to know the map. Tomorrow he'll go out again at 8:30. He'll visit Harold, check on the residents at Maple Crest, pause beneath Marjan's window. The pattern will continue because that's what patterns do. They hold when everything else shifts. They remind us that some things endure, and I'll be here when he returns, with food and warmth and gratitude for the gift of this ordinary, extraordinary life we've built together. Outside, the evening deepened into night. The streetlights came on, creating pools of yellow in the darkness. And right on schedule, because Bramble was always on schedule, the cat door whisked open. Era watched him disappear into the October darkness, the GPS tracker, newly replaced and functioning, blinking its steady reassurance on her phone app. She didn't worry anymore. She'd learned to trust the route, to trust Bramble's instincts, to trust that the connections they'd built were strong enough to hold. At 11:17, 3 minutes later than usual, she noted with a smile, the cat door whisked again. Bramble entered, moving directly to his water bowl for a long drink. Then he walked to where Era sat on the couch, jumped up beside her, and pressed his head against her hand. "Welcome home," she said. His purr rumbled through the quiet apartment, steady as a heartbeat. And in that moment, Era understood the truth that Bramble had been demonstrating all along. Home wasn't a place. It was a route you traveled, a network you maintained, a collection of people and moments you honored by showing up reliably, by paying attention deliberately, by choosing connection over convenience again and again. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the warmth of his body against her side, and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. The HOA would have more forms, the shelter would request more documentation, winter would test their resolve with its cold and darkness. But they'd face it together, with a committee of support and a community that had learned to value what Bramble represented. The washing machine in her apartment hummed, warm and steady. The scent of fabric softener drifted through the room, lavender, always lavender, because Era had learned what comfort smelled like to those she cared for. And Bramble, settling deeper into his favorite corner with a contented sigh, closed his eyes. The path continued, as it always would. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. And sometimes that was the only reason you needed. 5 years later, on a crisp April morning, Era stood at Harold's bench with a much older Bramble on her lap. The cat was 11 now, moving more slowly, but still insisting on his evening rounds with the same determined precision he'd shown since the beginning. Harold had passed the previous winter, peacefully and surrounded by the community he'd helped build. His bench now had a plaque, in memory of Harold and Joan Graves, who taught us that love creates gardens. The purple flowers bloomed as reliably as ever, tended now by a rotation of volunteers coordinated through an app that had been developed based on the Bramble network model. 23 communities across 3 states had adopted variations of their shared custody framework. A documentary filmmaker had approached Era about telling their story. Mahjong was still alive, stubborn as a cat, she liked to say, still watching from her window, still waving when Bramble paused beneath it. The Hales had moved to a house in the suburbs, but they drove back twice a month so their daughter, now in kindergarten, could see her cat. New families had taken their place in the Tuesday-Thursday rotation, and Maplecrest, once resistant to policy changes, now had 4 official therapy animals and was considered a model facility for community-integrated elder care. Era had written a book about it all, published by a small press and selling modestly but steadily. She donated the proceeds to animal shelters and organizations that facilitated community care programs. But the real story, the one that mattered most, wasn't in the book or the documentary or the policy changes they'd inspired. It was in the quiet moments like this one, sitting on a bench holding a cat, watching purple flowers bloom, knowing that connection was possible, that community could be chosen, that love was a series of small, consistent actions rather than a single grand gesture. Bramble stirred in her lap, lifting his head to sample the spring air. His whiskers twitched. His amber eyes, dimmer now but still watchful, scanned the park. "Getting old, buddy," Era said softly. "Aren't we both?" But age didn't stop the route. That evening at precisely 8:30, Bramble would position himself by the door, and Era would let him out, watch him on the GPS tracker, the 4th one now, the previous 3 having worn out from constant use, and trust that he'd return. Because belonging wasn't geography, it was commitment, and belonging didn't end. Not when you tended it, honored it, showed up for it day after day after day. Era looked at the purple flowers, at the memorial plaque, at the neighborhood she'd come to know so well through Bramble's eyes. "The path continues," she whispered, and Bramble, warm in her lap, purred his agreement.